This is Jason Anderson, Chairman of the Killenly Town Council, and I am calling this meeting to order. This is the regular Town Council meeting of Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. It is currently 7 p.m. Mr. Wood, would you open us up in prayer?
Heavenly Father, again, we seek your wisdom. We seek unity as one mind, one body to best serve this great town. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For roll call purposes, all council members are in attendance. We'll now move on to item 5A and 5B, adoption of minutes of previous meetings. Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes from special town council meeting February 1st, 2022, and regular town council meeting February 8th, 2022?
I'll make that motion.
Patty George, I'll second.
Motion has been made by Mr. Wood, seconded by Ms. George. Is there any discussion or correction of these minutes?
There is, and I'm just trying to find it real quick. I noticed it when I was reading this electronically.
On 425,
I believe so.
where Lori Zornato is, it says she's appointed to the Board of Education.
Oh, that's another one.
Oh, jeez.
On 425.
425 3C.
Just trying to find it real quick. Here it is. It's on page 432, under 10D, where it says M made a motion. It doesn't specify who made that motion. Ten B.
Oh.
And that was the regular meeting. We can.
Ray Wood, Patty George.
Okay, perfect.
You that made the motion and Patty that seconded the motion. That's why I keep notes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Any other corrections, comments on these minutes? All those in favor of adopting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on the agenda to 6A, Proclamation recognizing March 2022 as Women's History Month. Ms. Wakefield, you wanted to do this?
Proclamation recognizing the month of March 2022 as Women's History Month in the town of Killingley. Whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic and heroic contributions towards the growth and strength of our nation in countless recorded and unrecorded ways. Whereas American women have played a unique role throughout the history of our nation by fighting for equality while continuing to be instrumentally critical to their economic and cultural growth while combating discrimination and still fulfilling social roles in the labor force both inside and outside of the home. Whereas American women have served our country courageously among our military branches, obtained higher graduate degrees, become great leaders of companies, and serve in government offices. Whereas despite these contributions, the role of the American woman in history has been consistently overlooked and undervalued in the literature, teaching, and study of American history. Whereas in 1980, President Carter officially declared the week of March 8th to be the National Women's History Week due to the growing popularity and increased education and congressional resolutions In 1987, President Ronald Reagan passed a proclamation that March be recognized as Women's History Month. Now therefore be it proclaimed, the Killingly Town Council does hereby recognize the month of March 2022 as Women's History Month, which is a time for expressing gratitude, a time to honor their strength, defeats, and triumphs, and their passionate stand-up for equality. The contributions women have made to our towns, states, nations are heroic. Killingly Town Council, Jason Anderson, Chairman, dated at Killingly, Connecticut, this 8th day of March 2022. And I would also like to add, at the end of this week, Girl Scouts will celebrate their 110th birthday.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wakefield. Next up on the agenda is 6B, proclamation recognizing March 2022 as National Nutrition Month. Proclamation recognizing the month of March 2022 as National Nutrition Month in the town of Killingly, whereas National Nutrition Month was established by the American Dietetic Association and first celebrated in 1973 as a presidential proclamation by President Richard Nixon as Nutritional Week. Federal and state governments incorporate National Nutrition Month to foster healthy eating and ways to educate the public. Whereas the lack of proper nutrition education can lead to overconsumption of foods that are high in fats and low in essential vitamins, depriving our bodies and compromising our quality of life. Nutrition needs change over an individual's lifespan, and following a healthy dietary pattern can help maintain good health and reduce risk of chronic disease throughout all stages of life. And whereas the campaign for Nutrition Month for March 2022 is Celebrate a World of Flavors, eating more fresh foods and those of our other cultures, choosing a colorful plate of natural colors and fresh flavors, packing lunch, drinking water, and shopping the perimeter of your local markets, encourage healthier nutritional habits to meet the needs of ourselves and our families. And whereas the Killingly Town Council encourages all citizens to join the campaign and become informed about their nutrition and the nutrition of others in the hope of achieving optimum health for both today and tomorrow. And now therefore be it proclaimed, the Killingly Town Council does hereby recognize the month of March 2022 as National Nutrition Month and promote healthy living through good nutrition, physical fitness, and overall healthy lifestyle. Killingly Town Council, Jason Anderson, Chairman, dated at Killingly, Connecticut, this 8th day of March 2022. Next up on the agenda is item 6C, Conservation Commission Environmental Awards recipients Byron Martin and Earl Mcwilliams. Ms. Bromwell, do you want to present these plaques?
Just for information, I'm Donna Brownwell. I've been around town for 40 years and been on the Conservation Commission for 20 years. We've been doing this environmental award over the last 20 years, and it recognizes an individual, organization, school, or business that contributes to the awareness, and care and enhancement or protection of Killingly's open spaces and natural resources. I believe it is important to recognize our citizens who work in the background, each in their own commitment to make Killingly a good place to live. We have dedicated volunteers in lots of ways in town, on commissions, schools, churches, scouts, historical, it could go on, who don't do it for the recognition, they just do it. So we at the Conservation Commission are commending Byron Martin and Earl Mcwilliams for our environmental award this year. And I don't know, you want me to read a little bit of why we chose them? Or just, yep, okay. Byron Martin has served on the Agricultural Commission since 2012, when he served as chairperson for a couple of years before recently becoming vice chair. He's supportive of Killingly Community Garden and donates agricultural supplies to them. He spends a lot of time working to educate the public on agricultural practices, including offering annual beekeeping classes for beginning beekeepers. He also grows pollinator plants around town to help sustain the local bee population. He's also the owner of Logis, which helps bring gardening and rare, unusual plants to the community and around the country. He built a passive solar greenhouse as an alternative to heating the greenhouses by burning wood to capture nature's energy and conserve resources. With the help of Martin, grant funding was obtained for energy efficiency and solar energy, which resulted in the reduction of Logi's carbon footprint using renewable energy and constructing an energy-efficient production range. That's a good thing. So he's got a plaque, you've got a plaque there, and his plaque reads, Byron Martin for 10 years as Agricultural Commissioner, educating the public and bringing gardening to the community. So this is Byron. Our other recipient, we had two strong recommendations this year. Usually we just give one, but this year we had two very strong recommendations, is Earl Mcwilliams, this guy right here. He was nominated for his dedication and vigilant actions in protecting Killingly's air quality by researching and educating the public on the negative effects of air pollution. With a number of other committed citizens, some might be even here tonight, they organized Not Another Power Plant. Over the past 5 years, Earl has printed thousands of flyers, organized public demonstrations by the mall in Dayville, and encouraged citizens to call the governor's office objecting to the proposed power plant. His approach was understanding the issues and educating on the facts. It became a statewide issue, actually, involving 13 different groups around the state and citizens from other area towns to advocate for our northeast corner's health. His long-haul commitment to Killingly deserve our environmental award. His plaque reads, Earl Mcwilliams for his vigilance in educating and organizing citizens in protecting the air quality of Killingly. Oh, we have to have a picture. So the Conservation Commission needs more resident environmentalists. How you like that word? You don't need to be an expert. You just love Killingly and are concerned about protecting its rural character and open spaces. The commission meets on the third Wednesday at 7 p.m. at the town hall downstairs in 102, and always welcomes everyone. Step up and make a difference. We've got two of our conservation commissioners here tonight, Mike Montville and Jean Mountford. So that's a great thing. Contact either Allison Brady downstairs or me as chair of the Conservation Commission, and check our updated website. So there's lots of things on the website, killinglyconservation.org.
Next item on the agenda is 6D, Agricultural Commission Service Award, recipient of Frank Anastasio.
Frank, we have an award for you tonight, as you know, and Frank has been a member of or previously was a member of the Ag Commission from its beginning. He actually spearheaded the organization to bring it to fruition. I remember I met him at a farmer's market somewhere along the way, and he said, throw some papers in my hand. He said, you know, you ought to get involved in this. And I think at that time we were looking at rewriting the regs for agriculture in the town. And, you know, Frank is a leader, and I really appreciated all the time that he spent with us on the commission. He always had a great perspective whenever we were discussing things. It always changed the discussion and brought things around into a new perspective. So he was very valuable. He has been very valuable. And now he's in his retirement, and it was part of the Ag Commission that we thought we should give you an honor for all you've done.
Next item up on the agenda is 6E, presentation of fiscal year 2020-2021 Municipal Audit Report by Mahoney and Sable Company LLP. And thank you for joining us remotely. Would you like to take this over from here?
Sure, and can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes,
All right,
we
my
can.
name is Mike Van Deventer. Again, I'm an audit partner at Mahoney Sable, ultimately responsible for overseeing the audit work and issuing the reports on behalf of the firm. Also joining me this evening is Samantha Thomas. Sam is a senior manager at the firm, and she was really responsible for the day-to-day execution and oversight of our audit procedures. So we're happy to be here this evening to present the audit results for the town's fiscal year 2021 financials. What I will do is go through a presentation that will cover the scope of work, the audit reports that were issued. I'll provide some overall financial highlights and make our required communications. And again, I will pause throughout the presentation to answer any questions that anybody may have. So with that, I'm going to share the screen. All right, can everyone see that? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Mary. All right, so moving to slide 2, in terms of the overall scope of work, again, we did perform an audit of the town's financial statements. We performed that audit in accordance with both the auditing standards issued by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, as well as the government auditing standards issued by the Government Accountability Office. In addition, based on the level of federal and state funding that was received and expended by the town, we did perform both federal and state single audits. In addition, we also perform an agreed upon procedures on the end of school year reports. And again, those reports are filed with the State of Connecticut Department of Education by the school district. In addition to those attest services, we do also perform some non-audit services for the town. So again, we do assist in the preparation of the financial statements, as well as the schedule of expenditure of federal awards and state financial assistance and related notes. In addition, we do also assist in the conversion of the town's governmental fund financial statements to the government-wide financial statements. In order for our firm to be able to perform these procedures and services and remain independent of the town, management is required to oversee those services and ultimately accept responsibility for them. And again, Jennifer Hawkins, in her role as the finance director, has accepted responsibility for those services. In connection with the audit, we do issue a number of reports. And again, the main report is the report on the financial statements. We did issue unmodified opinions on your financial statements. Again, an unmodified opinion is expressed when the auditor concludes that the financial statements have been presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States, and that is as established by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Again, do like to point out that our opinion does provide reasonable assurance rather than absolute assurance that the financial statements are free from a material misstatement, whether due to error or fraud. In addition to the report on the financial statements, we do also issue a report on compliance and on internal control over financial reporting. Again, important to note here in this report, we do not actually express an opinion on your compliance with laws and regulations or on the effectiveness of your internal controls. Essentially, during the course of performing the audit, if we become aware of a material non-compliance with the law or regulation, or a material weakness in your internal controls, we are required to include it in this report. And again, we don't report any such matters. In connection with the federal single audit, we issue a report on compliance and on internal control at the federal award level. So again, in this report, we do actually express an opinion on the town's compliance with your major federal programs. For fiscal year 2021, the total federal awards expended by the town was about $3.6 million. Your major program that was tested was the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which was just over $1 million expended. We did issue unmodified opinions on compliance over that program. And again, we did not report any internal control deficiencies over your grant compliance. We issue a similar report in connection with the state single audit. Again, for fiscal year 2021, the total state financial assistance expended by the town was about $27.6 million. The majority of that is considered to be non-exempt, about $11.4 million, and that consists of your education cost sharing funds. The major state programs for the town were the Clean Water Fund grants and loans. That was about a total of $7.9 million, as well as the school readiness program, which was just over $368,000. So again, we did issue unmodified clean opinions on compliance over those programs, and we did not identify any deficiencies over your grant compliance. So this is probably a good time to just pause and ask if anybody has any questions as far as the scope of work or the audit reports that were issued. All right, having no questions, I will move on to your financial highlights. And again, we try to include some overall financial highlights that I think would be of importance to the board. Certainly to the extent we identified any financial issues, we would include those in these overall highlights. In terms of your general fund budgetary highlights, again, the original budget for the town did provide for the use of fund balance in the amount of $600,000. Your final budget did include an additional use of assigned fund balance in the amount of $881,000. That was to transfer the portion of the Board of Education budgetary surplus in the prior year to the non-lapsing fund. So that resulted in a planned reduction of your overall general fund balance in the amount of about $1.4 million. The actual change in fund balance was an increase of just over $2.7 million. And so that resulted in an overall favorable budgetary variance of about $4.2 million. So again, that surplus was derived from a surplus on revenues and other financing sources of about $119,000. And again, if you look at your detailed budgetary reports, you'll see that there was a minor shortfall in property tax collections, which was offset by favorable variances on building permits, town clerk fees, and tuitions. Your overall expenditures in transfers out were about $4.1 million less than budgeted. Again, that was driven by favorable variances across all your departments, including an overall education surplus of about $3.4 million. Again, no budgetary compliance issues were identified as a result of our audit work. Next slide goes over your governmental fund financial highlights. And again, this includes your general fund on a GAAP basis, as well as all of your special revenue and capital project funds. Your ending fund balances as of June 30th, 2021 totaled about $33 million. And again, that was an increase of about $13.6 million from the prior year. That increase was really driven by the recognition of your Clean Water Fund proceeds to fund the sewer renovation. In terms of your overall fund balance, the general fund had an ending fund balance of about $21.1 million. That was an increase of about $4.1 million from the prior year. Of the $21 million, about $13 million is considered unassigned, and that's sufficient to cover just about 2.6 months, or represents 21.5% of your fiscal year 2021 budgetary expenditure appropriations. Again, the guidance that is out there is that all governments should maintain approximately 2 months of reserves in your unassigned fund balance, so you are right around that threshold. In terms of your capital improvement fund, that did have a fund balance deficit of about $2.2 million. That was a decrease in the overall deficit of about $8.4 million from the prior year. The majority of that deficit is driven by timing of when the funding for your capital projects come in and when the actual expenditures are incurred. So again, the decrease in your deficit in that fund primarily represents the recognition of clean water loan proceeds in the amount of about $15.2 million, again, offset by your current year capital outlays. And then all of your other funds had a fund balance of about $14 million, which was an increase of about $1 million from the prior year. So again, there are detailed schedules in the financial statements that includes the financial position of all of your funds. This next slide includes highlights for your internal service fund, which is your self-insured health insurance fund. That did have an unrestricted net position of about 3.3 million, and that was an increase of about 672,000 from the prior year. So again, these funds are continuing to see positive claims experiences, really resulting from the impact of the pandemic, with a lot of elective surgeries and doctor visits being pushed off because of the pandemic. In terms of your government-wide financial statements, and again, the government-wide financial statements are prepared on a full accrual basis of accounting. So that includes all of your capital assets as well as all of your related debt. The focus on the government-wide financial statements are really on town's long-term liabilities. Overall, the town is reporting a positive unrestricted net position of about 25.8 million. In terms of your net pension and OPEB liabilities, the town is currently reporting a net pension asset of about 1.6 million. So your pension plan was about 125% funded as of year end, and that was utilizing a discount rate of about 6.625%. So again, we saw the market really recoup the initial losses that were associated with the pandemic. And there were significant investment gains that were recognized during the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021, which really had a positive impact on the funded status of your pension plans. The town is reporting a net OPEB liability of about 6.6 million. That plan is currently 13% funded. And again, that's utilizing a lower discount rate because of the overall funded status of about 3.9%. So again, that liability reflects really the establishment of a trust in fiscal year 2016, and then subsequent partial funding of your annual actuarial determined employer contributions. So before I move on to the required communications, again, I know there's a lot of financial information there. Certainly encourage you all to go through the financial statements, and if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those now. If you have questions later, again, happy to answer those at any point in time if you want to just filter those through Jen.
I do have one question in regards to the OPEB liability. Now, my understanding is that we do have one fund that there is employee contribution. How is that reflected in this, if it is at all?
Do you want me to take that
In the
one?
OPEB,
You got it?
no, go ahead.
So the OPEB fund is the recognition of other post-employment benefits, and that is relationed primarily to health insurance for retirees, those that have retired out. The Killingly's post-employment benefit is pay-as-you-go. So those employees, or retired employees, thanks, Jen, I'm like echoing. Those retirees are required to pay the full cost of that as they go along. However, there is a liability in that because so it is the liability calculation. The reason why we don't have this funded more is because the liability assumes that we have to bear the full cost of that as a retiree, which we don't do that in actuality. While the calculation addresses that partially, it also recognizes that they get a benefit by being part of a group insurance policy as opposed to having to have an individual plan. So there's a number of factors that go into that other post-employment benefit analysis. We have taken the stance of funding partially simply for the availability to communicate that and address it with our credit rating agencies. It has, because we did establish a trust, if you just did a separate reserve fund, that doesn't count as funding. So we had for a long time a set aside as a separate reserve, like we do for our winter maintenance reserve, that type of thing. But that is not considered funding it. It's not deemed as funded unless you have put it in a trust. So we established that trust in 2016 with the goal that we would put some level of funding in that on an annual basis to continue to acknowledge that overall liability, but recognize that we have a pay-as-you-go system. So, did I cover it, Mike?
Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. It was. I did understand how that is set up and how that works. It was more of I want any public who's listening to be able to understand that it's not like we have this OPEB liability that the town is on the hook for that much of it, and the taxpayers would be could possibly have to cover that liability without the public understanding that this is employee, there's employee contribution to cover a lot of that.
And it's also very rare for municipality to have this kind of a fund.
So for the OPEB trust, so this requirement came out of GASB, what, Mike, it came out, what, in 2012, 2013, maybe?
Probably a little bit later than that.
A little, yeah. So
Yeah,
that was when they
It's-
kind of
it's
created
recent.
the methodology around it. The credit rating agencies really started asking about, whether or not municipalities were starting to address it financially. So when the guidance initially came out when the requirements initially came out from GASB, General Accounting Standards Board, who is what sets all of the guidelines here that we're going through that Mike has to audit us on, they set it with no funding requirement. So it was supposed to be calculated and recorded on our financial statements, but there was no, no requirement necessarily for funding. Well, as we kind of chug along and that liability continued to grow annually, that's when the credit rating agency started saying, you have a big liability on your books. How are you making or addressing this in plans? So that's where the requirement for it to be in a trust came about. Killing was one of the first municipalities to develop a trust, even at a minimal funding level. There are still some towns, but I think a lot of them have moved into this direction of having a trust over time, simply because it's driven by your credit rating agencies. If you don't have something, it generally is a negative viewpoint on from your credit rating agency. But we did we were kind of in the forefront of establishing that trust.
Right. Mayor, the only thing I'll add is, again, by establishing the trust, you're really establishing the ability to generate additional revenues outside of taxation. So, again, for fiscal year 21, there was significant investment gains in these trust funds. Those gains can be used in the future to offset retiree insurance costs. So, again, it does provide the town another revenue stream to help offset these costs. But again, your plan isn't primarily borne by the employer. So we typically see towns fully funding these trusts when they pay 100% of the retirees' cost share. Here, the retirees are actually paying your premiums. You're just really recognizing a benefit to the retirees for giving them access to your group health insurance rates.
Thank you.
All right, so this next section goes over our required communications. And again, these
We do
communications
have
are really...
one more. Excuse me, we
I'm
do
sorry,
have
go
one
ahead.
more question, Mr. Grandelsky.
Okay.
Getting back to the use of the fund balance, and maybe just a little clarification. The original budget, as it says here, was $600,000. Then there was use of monies to go into the non-lapsing account of $880,000. But when the money went into the fund balance I guess that happened in the prior year, that was the 2.7 million from the Board of Education. Because money went into the fund balance, but then we didn't use some. I'm trying to remember what.
Yeah, correct. So there was a surplus in fiscal year 2020. That portion would have fallen to your general fund balance. So when you made the appropriation or the transfer of that surplus, it's just being reflected as a current year transaction. So again, you had planned for that. So it's not necessarily a reduction of your unassigned fund balance, but a reduction of your overall general fund balance.
So the surplus from the education budget for last fiscal year was $3.4 million, correct, Mike?
Yeah, I don't have the number in front of me,
That's
Mary,
what's
but-
on the bottom of the slide.
Okay, okay.
No, Jen, the 880,000.
Oh, including the surplus, sorry, you're right. That includes the surplus. So
Yeah, that related to the fiscal year 2000.
That's everything.
The money goes in one fiscal year from unexpended monies, and then the next year when we're funding the non-lapsing account, that's when we're taking, so it's a year delay.
Correct.
Yeah, Board of Ed is that, right. So the Board of Ed, so if I'm looking at your slide and reading the slide correctly, the Board of Education's surplus for fiscal year 2021 was $3.4 million. That's how much they turned back, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Yep, did that answer your question, or?
Close enough, I think that's.
Any other
What's
questions?
going on with that? That's good.
Yeah, it's really in terms of your overall budget, it's really a timing issue. So it doesn't really have an impact on your current year budgetary results. But when it gets approved, the way it gets presented, it has to be reflected in your current year budget. All right, so again, moving on to our required communications. Again, these communications are required by our auditing standards. The first item here talks about our responsibility under our auditing standards. So again, although we do assist in the preparation of the financial statements, they are the responsibility of management. Everything included in the financial statements did come from the town. Again, it's our responsibility to perform our audit procedures and issue our reports. In terms of the plan, scope, and timing of the audit, again, no changes in the overall scope of work that was originally agreed upon. There were two 30-day extension requests that were obtained from OPM. In terms of significant audit findings, again, we do review the town's accounting practices and policies. One of the items we will point out is that the town did implement a new accounting standard, GASB Statement Number 84, on fiduciary activities. So that did result in the recharacterization of certain private purpose trust funds and agency funds within the financial statements. So the application of that statement did result in a cumulative effect adjustment recorded as of the beginning of the year that increased your town's net position in the amount of about $495,000. So again, this consists of your private purpose trust funds as well as your student activity funds. Based on the guidance in statement number 84 in the administrative involvement associated with those funds, certain of those funds were reclassified as governmental funds rather than fiduciary funds. Again, always included in the scope of the audit, it just changed in terms of the overall presentation in the financial statements. We do look at significant estimates and judgments. Those are really involved in determining amounts that are included in your government-wide financial statements. So it includes your estimated useful lives that are assigned to your capital assets, as well as the discount rates that are utilized to determine your net pension and OPEB liabilities. Again, we did deem those estimates to be reasonable and consistent with what other municipalities are utilizing. Happy to report there were no significant difficulties encountered in performing the audit. As a result of our audit work, we did have two uncorrected misstatements. During the course of performing the audit, we may identify adjustments that get recorded in your financial statements, and then there may be adjustments that we identify that do not get reflected in your financial statements. So there were two adjustments that were not recorded and included in the financial statements. One was an understatement of accounts payables and the related expenditures in the amount of $65,000 in your capital improvement fund. And the other was an understatement of accounts payable and related expenditures and grant receivables and related revenues in the amount of $89,000 in your education grants fund. Both of those transactions were really due to timing It had no impact on any compliance or grant funding. So ultimately, we did pass on reporting those in the financial statements. They will get picked up and reported in your fiscal year 2022 financial statements, but we did deem those to be immaterial to your overall financial statements. Happy to report that we had no disagreements with management. We did obtain a management representation letter. There was nothing unusual that we requested from management. And again, we were not aware of any consultations by management with any other independent accountants. Again, if so, we are required to communicate that to you. In terms of audit recommendations, and again, these both recommendations are kind of carried forward from the prior year. The first item here is on the timeliness of financial reporting. Again, we do recommend that the town and the school district develop formal closing timelines, ultimately to ensure that all information needed to prepare the financial statements is prepared timely, and that ultimately can be monitored by management to assist in meeting the December 31st statutory reporting requirement. So again, we see this a lot with municipalities where, again, you have closing procedures. There are a number of schedules that are required to be prepared in connection with the audit that you may not really need for internal purposes. And so the recommendation really is to kind of develop your own internal timeline for completing those schedules rather than waiting for the audit to commence. And again, there was certain schedules for the school district that when we had requested them as part of the audit, again, they hadn't been necessarily prepared yet. Once we got the information, again, the information was clean, so we didn't have any adjustments. So again, the recommendation is really kind of developing an internal timeline rather than waiting on the external audit timeline. And then the second recommendation relates to the capital improvement fund. So as noted in the prior year, there were some deficits within your capital project fund. Again, I think it was important to note that those deficits did not relate to an over expenditure of an appropriation, but rather funding deficits. So again, I think, Mary and Jen, you can speak to this, but you've identified the projects that those funding deficits relate to. And so again, the recommendation there is just to develop a plan to actually fund those deficits.
And so if I can, with regards to that, so we are working with our bond counsel because we've identified, and some of them are bond issuance related. So the funding was appropriated. It's just that when they finalized or did the final borrowing, it was before they finalized all expenditures on the project. So it's not exceeding authorization. It's just that the total last bit of the project wasn't necessarily bonded. So we're working with our bond counsel because we're getting ready to do bond issuances as to whether or not that small amount can be managed within that. And then if we have to do other consideration, we'll be bringing that before the council for any transfers that may need to be done. But we think that in working with our bond counsel, we think that we'll be able to wrap up some of those.
So how many older projects are there? And
I think there's only about three
what
that
are they?
that impacts.
Four larger projects.
3 or 4. Yeah, you got to go to the mic. Go to the mic. This is Jen Hawkins, our finance director.
So there's 4 larger projects and a handful of small projects that were previously identified as LoSiP funding that were deemed LoSiP, ineligible. So those would have to be rolled into another funding source, or typically either whether it can be bonded or transfers from the general fund, or if there's excess from other projects. But the 4 larger projects are bond related. So we're looking to see if we can roll that into the next bond issuance because some of those authorizations have not been closed. I think there was
It's mostly school projects.
mostly school projects. So
They're all school projects.
They're all school projects.
Mm-hmm.
In relation to that question, so did we over exceed the fund? Like some of these
No.
projects, they have a not to exceed
Correct.
number or something like that.
Right, so we've not exceeded the appropriation, so the not to exceed number, the amount that we were authorized to expend. We've never over expended an authorization. With every authorization, there's the revenue side, right? So we're talking about the revenue side, not the expenditure side, right? So the revenue side, it's either we were getting grant money for it, or we were going to issue bonds for it, that type of stuff, right? So that's where there's been a shortfall on the revenue side. So we have to, in order to be able to fully close out the project, we have to match that revenue back to it to be able to fully close out the project.
So if the revenue wasn't, or we anticipated a higher revenue,
Right, so for example, on the bond issuance, on the bond one, right? So there's a couple of bond ones. We were authorized to bond X number, right? And when they did the final borrowing, they might have done the borrowing for it before they were fully completed, and they may have done an estimate. Oh, we think that we're going to only need 500,000 more. That's what they bonded for, and they really needed, $548,000 more, right? Well, that 48,000 did get bonded. So now is where the cleanup is, where we have to, which is why we've really adopted over time. So these are older projects. Over time, during my stint as a finance director and up until now, our process for final borrowing is we wait until we're done with the project. Then we borrow. So that way you don't end up with these little pieces that are left over and that you go, 3 years later going, oh, gee, we didn't, we had these extra, ended up coming in a little bit higher than what we estimated, even though we didn't exceed the appropriation. We were still well under budget, but we didn't estimate quite as good as we thought we were. And now we have these little pieces that you can't go out and bond $48,000. That's just not a bondable amount by itself. It has to roll into something bigger. So our approach now has been, and we continue to be, is that our last bond issuance for a project is after the close, like after the very end of it. So that way we know we're bonding everything that we need to bond for it, and we're not running into these little components at the end. So that's the way we've modified the internal control practice to prevent that from happening in the future. But we still, and I will say, Jen identified this in her evaluation and reconciliation of our capital projects fund a little over a year and a half ago during the previous. So this was identified internally, that these pieces were out there, and we've been developing the plan on how to address them. So we're there.
yeah, because it's funny here, the way it says funding deficits, and it's kind of like you're looking at, well, maybe did we overspend, but no, we didn't overexpend what was appropriated up to spend. We just didn't fund it, or whatever, when the money came from. That was
The revenue side didn't match up.
Yeah, that's correct. And again, we didn't identify any overexpending of the authorizations. You also are including a schedule in the financial statements that does show your appropriations or authorizations, and then also your cumulative project costs. So again, that's another control of how you're tracking to make sure you're not overexpending your authorizations.
That's on page 101 if anyone wants to jot that.
Any more questions from council members? Jen or Mary, do you have anything you need to add? Want to add?
I will say that, having been on both sides of the fence of an audit, I believe that Mike's firm did a really good job in auditing our information. I, as a former auditor, look at, what information they're gathering, what information they're asking of us. And, since we have had Mahoney and Sable now for several years, I always look as a manager as to whether or not they continue to ask all of the questions and don't just become complacent with our previous year's answers. And Mike's team has always continually followed up and checked on all processes and procedures. So I appreciate their thoroughness of the audit. And I know Jen and the team worked really diligent in pulling together the financial statements in preparation for this. As far as the timeliness of financial reporting, that was identified last year. Jen put together a schedule. She was former municipal finance, municipal auditor. So she put together a schedule, and that she was trying to work together with the school department in getting that schedule enacted. We were not as successful as we had hoped to be this last year. I'm hoping that in the upcoming year we'll be more successful. A lot of, the delay really, towards the end, really was a lot on the school side. And I know that Christine has, a lot on her plate. So if there's a way that we can address some of these sooner in the cycle, that's the hope, that we can help work with them in being able to address the necessary items earlier. And take less of the burden off when she gets into budget season as well. So hopefully we can work better on that timeliness and be more prepared. We all collectively, we would like to see this audit issued in December. My goal right now is to get it issued by January 31st next year. So that would be only one extension. So that's the goal right now, because you can't, to move the cycle whole 2 months and try and shift all of that, especially on the Board of Education side, they have a heavy lift on this. I think we need to be realistic on that timeline. So as long as we're making progress towards that, then I think that we're going to get there. But, Jen, I think, has put together a pretty good closing schedule. Now it's, trying to get both sides to be able to implement that in a ready fashion. So I think we're trying to make progress on that.
Thank you. Is there any chance any of the delay on the Board of Ed side? My understanding is they're using 2 different financial softwares throughout the Board of Ed system, or 2 different softwares that...
They're getting ready to transfer. They haven't done that yet. They're they're going to have to transition to new software. I believe their software is going to be not supported here shortly, so they're going to have to be transitioning to a new software. And that will provide another, challenge, because they will have to almost dual system for a year end. We had to do that the prior year. So this is our first year clean on the new system. So that does take a lot of extra time when you have to do dual system like that, but not for this year.
I was just going to say, in an audit, even implementing an audit on a system conversion takes time on the audit procedure side too, because things don't line up to the prior year the same way. So there's work on their side to transition our data into their software.
Yeah.
So that takes time in the first year through, as far as that goes too. So
Yes.
Now, if the Board of Ed was to implement the same software the town is using, would that make the audit process any easier?
So there's still that first year of implementation that they still have to get through. Overall, you're essentially pulling the same reports or similar reports. Format ends up being the same, so I think the auditor ends up, they don't have to get used to looking at a report in different formats, trying to hunt the same information in 2 different formats. It's the same format. So, in that respect, it makes it easier, but I don't know that it doesn't necessarily reduce quantity of work that has to be done within both systems.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? All right. If you have nothing left, thank you for the presentation. And thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And again, I would just filter those through Jennifer or Mary.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to the agenda. Item 7, unfinished business for town meeting action, and we have none. Moving further forward, item 8, citizen statements and petitions. Ms. Colorio, can you go over any thing that was submitted by email?
Yes, there were 2 public comments submitted by email. The first one is Lois Latraverse, 64 Island Road, Dayville, and she submitted public comments supporting the award to Earl Mcwilliams from the Conservation Commission for the Environmental Award. The second submission was by Jason Anderson, 125 Lake Road, and the comment was in response to the public comment received at Sunday's goal-setting session.
Thank you. At this time, I will open up. If there's any members of the public who would like to make comment, please come up to the podium and state your name and address.
Charlie Hutchins, East Franklin Street. I have some handout material. Do you mind if I pass it out?
That's fine.
I split them up so that you could start on one side with Ed, and of course it's gonna be all screwed up, but I think. All right, here, you're gonna need these for this side. Members of the town council, town manager, citizens watching at home, and at home, sitting behind me. Not too good tonight. I came here to speak to you about something simple. It's called whole milk. I know at this busy, controversial, and upsetting time, many would say, how come or why? The answer is simple. The federal government and USDA banned whole milk for kids in school over 10 years ago. The good taste, vitamins, minerals are very important to help in controlling childhood obesity and in promoting good health. I got to add a line that I didn't put into this. How many of you drank whole milk in school? I thought I'd get pretty near everybody. I ask you to understand that the law passed 10 to 12 years ago is a federal mandate. I don't know whether you like mandates or not, but I don't. Banning whole milk in schools. House Bill H.R. 1861 seeks to return whole milk in schools by freedom of choice. They're not being told they have to drink it. It's their choice. For kids, I include parents and citizens because freedom of choice for health of our kids in school actually affects all of us. I ask you, the parents, citizens, to contact your 5 federal representatives. Mr. Courtney is ours in District, I think it's 2. Joanna Hayes is in 5, and I can't remember the others. Oh, Rosa DeLauro, I think, is one. I also asked this, here we go. I also asked this town council to craft and vote on a resolution supporting House Bill 1861, whole milk for kids in school, and that if you should do it, that copies be sent to our 5 House of Representatives and 2 federal senators. I gotta say, if we get the amount of votes to bring it to the floor in the House of Representatives, it will still, I believe, require a majority vote. There's 435 House of Representatives, so therefore, across the United States, you're going to need a minimum of 270 to get rid of the law that's in effect now. And you're also, since the senators are 50-50, it's going to go to the senators too. So, asking for their support and acknowledgement of the federals of H.R. 1861. You can learn more about this important subject by referring to a website titled 97milk.com. I guess I don't really need to. I apologize to the citizens behind me because I did not make enough copies for them. I will make more copies soon, and I will be asking the town manager and the chairman to allow me to leave some copies in the town hall lobby next week. Thank you for your time, Charlie.
Thank you very much.
As public comment, this will also be scanned and put on the website. with the meeting, because it is a handout from public comment.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further public comment? Last call for public comment. Seeing none, we'll move on in the agenda. The next item up on the agenda is council staff and comments. I will open up to any council members or staff who have comments. I will say, as long as you have no issue with it and there's no issue with him putting these flyers downstairs, I would not be opposed to it one bit.
No, that's fine.
Okay. I agree.
What was it that he suggested we do? We make a resolution?
Resolution. Supporting the House
And then
bill.
write something to the, that's,
The 5 House of Representatives and 2 senators.
Right, so you would transmit, the council's done this previously, when you do a resolution supporting a position at either state or federal level, the signed resolution goes, is transmitted to the appropriate representatives of that body.
automatically. I didn't realize.
That's, my office sends it.
Thank you.
How would we deal with this? We put it on the agenda or
Yeah,
something?
put an
Next
agenda
meeting
item.
Or something? Okay.
Do you want me to work on crafting?
I would, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe there's enough support on the council for,
I will work on crafting, and the chair can determine from there
okay,
what.
thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further comments, we'll move on in the agenda. Next item up is item 10A, appointments to boards and commissions. Donna Bromwell is seeking reappointment to the Conservation Commission as a regular member. The term would run from March of 2022 through February of 2027. Ms. Bromwell has been a member of the Conservation Commission as a regular member since December of 1999. Her attendance has been steady over the course of her appointment. The Conservation Commission is a commission with 5 regular members and 2 alternate members. Currently, there are 4 active regular members, including Ms. Bromwell, and 1 active alternate member. There is 1 regular member and 1 alternate member seat vacancy. Can I get a motion to reappoint Ms. Bromwell?
I'll make that motion.
Motion was made by Mr. Grandelski, I believe, seconded by Mr.
I'll
Wood.
second it, yeah.
Comments? Mr. Grandelski.
You go first.
Okay.
Mr. Wood.
It's the problem when we both want to talk here. I gotta say, for Miss Bromwell, and I might get myself a little in trouble for saying that, I wish we could replicate her energy, her enthusiasm for this. I know our other boards and commissions, they really are enthusiastic about what they do, but whew, Donna brings a whole new level of enthusiasm. And I have to say, I greatly appreciate it and the hard work she and the whole Conservation Commission puts in, and absolutely is somebody that is a worthy member of this organization, and she does a great thing for our town. And I wish I had that level of enthusiasm. Whew.
It's always there. I mean, she actually comes to many council meetings, never mind just chairman of the Conservation Commission. You saw last week when she gave an update of what was, I mean, you didn't have to ask any questions. She was off to the a very positive commission. Just nothing negative. Tonight, I mean, the environmental award, she's right up there, she's prepared. I mean, so, you can't, like you said, it's great.
I did attend the mill bus tour this past Saturday, and she did a phenomenal job with it. And I was really impressed, and I learned a lot about the town that I didn't know. I actually encourage people. There is another one coming up. Next one, I believe, is April 5th. If there's vacancy, I would love, and I'm available, I'm definitely going to sign up for that one as well. Definitely encourage anyone who has never gone on one of these bus tours. Yeah, she did a phenomenal job with it.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna add that she has a tremendous amount of energy, and that the amount of time and effort that she puts into that commission is, it'd be a very big hole to fill if she wasn't reappointed.
I completely agree. Mr. Grandelsky.
Anybody who's taken the bus tour has a comment to the Conservation Commission, similar to what you just said, that I didn't realize all this was going, what happened in town prior to.
Yeah.
So it's a tour that you wouldn't think of, you couldn't put together yourself. Even I been here all my life, and they've got things that when they start discussing, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Next item up is, bear with me 1 second. 10B, John Ceratopolis is seeking reappointment to the Planning and Zoning Commission as a regular member. The term would run from January of 2022 through December of 2024. Mr. Ceratopolis has been a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission as a regular member since March of 2021. Previously was an alternate member since 2020. His attendance has been steady over the course of his appointment. The Planning and Zoning Commission is a commission with 5 regular members and 3 alternate members. Currently, there are 5 active regular members, including Mr. Ceratopolis, and 1 alternate member. There are 2 alternate member seat vacancies. Can I get a motion to reappoint Mr. Ceratopolis?
So moved.
Motion has been made by Ms. Wakefield and seconded by Ms. George. I will open up for discussion, comments. I will start off with saying the planning and zoning meetings I've sat in on, that Mr. Ceratopolis was serving on, definitely asked a lot of questions, definitely heavily involved in the meetings, and definitely an asset to that commission.
I agree. I've sat in on a couple of them there. He's very an active participant in there. And kind of maybe unrelated, it says 2 alternate member spots. Didn't we just put an alternate to that, or was there 3 alternate member spots available to that? Was that the different?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember. I'd have to look at that.
I thought that Michael Hiko was put.
Yep.
there.
There's still 2.
There
There was 3,
three.
now there's only 2.
That's right.
Thank you, Anne Marie, for
Thank
being
you.
back there. Because I don't remember.
Any further comments?
Having served with Mr. Ceratopolis on the town council, and he's always been very opinionated. I think age has tempered him a little bit. I know he doesn't have any problem asking the tough questions, and I don't think that is ever going to change. So he's probably a really good asset, because in planning and zoning, those lawyers sometimes, they try to slide stuff through. So, you need somebody who's paying attention and catches them.
Ms. Barclay?
As the new liaison to the planning and zoning, I have the same comments. It's a very time-consuming, and you have to be very knowledgeable of all of the laws. And yes, the lawyers do try to slip things past, but all of the members are very intelligent, and nothing slips past them. So he's definitely an asset to the commission.
Thank you. Any further comments? Ms. George?
I was just saying, as the past liaison commission, you can tell John does his research. He does a really good job, and he looks ahead to how this is going to affect us down the road too, as they all do. But I mean, he does a lot of research.
Yeah.
Definitely an asset.
Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to item 10C. Chris Mcdonald is seeking appointment within the Conservation Commission from alternate member to regular member to fill vacancy. His term would run from March 1st of 2018 through February 28th of 2023. Mr. McDonald is currently seated as an alternate member As of November 1st, 2021, Mr. Mcdonald's attendance has been steady since his appointment. The Conservation Commission is a commission with 5 regular members and 2 alternate members. Currently, there are 4 active regular members, including Ms. Bromwell, and 1 active alternate member. There is 1 regular member and 1 alternate member seat vacancy. Can I get a appointment to appoint him to the Conservation Commission as a regular member?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Motion has been made by Mr. Grandelski, seconded by Mr. Cotula. Just for clarification purposes, I understand he was not here last week for an interview, and Ms. Colorio can actually speak to why that is.
Sure. So he was interviewed by the council in November when he was seated and appointed on the commission as an alternate member. So when a person has been interviewed within the last year, we don't make them come back and re-interview to the council. If they're just changing within the existing or reappointing if they have a very short end term on their thing. So he's been recently before the council for an interview.
Thank you. Any comments? Mr. Grandelski.
He's ready, well, he's been involved, and he was looking at this. We had a member, one of the other members, to try to get a resignation letter. He was ill, and it was hard to get that to be done. So he had to wait a little bit to get, moved up to regular for this to happen, and he's looking forward to being a regular member. And, well, you see Don, and they're all ready to go. So he wants to be a regular member, so he doesn't have to be brought up from alternate to regular if the people aren't there. So he's, again, the whole commission is, they're there, they want to go.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to item 11, reports from liaisons. We do not have a Board of Ed liaison here, and we also do not have a Borough Council liaison here.
It's very unusual for Ms. LeBeurge not to be here, so I hope she's feeling well.
Did they have a meeting?
I don't remember getting the packet in my email,
I don't know.
because usually Don, Brenda's pretty good about emailing out stuff.
I vaguely remember something about not being a meeting. Okay.
I didn't get a packet.
Okay.
Either way, even if there's nothing coming on, she comes in to report on that, so I hope she's feeling well.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, moving on in the agenda. Item 12A, discussion and acceptance of monthly budget reports, summary report on general fund appropriations for town government. Can I get a motion to adopt this?
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made by Mr. Grandelski and seconded by Mr. Wood. We'll open up for discussion, comments. Mr. Grandelski.
Oh, as I said here, on the highway maintenance, we've had a lot of storms on the weekends. Of course, we had the 2-foot snowfall, we saw the piles in the middle of Main Street the other day. So that budget is, as it says here, is taking a hit compared to last year. Hopefully,
Got some tonight coming.
We're in March. We're in March. So so you're right. So that budget, we're starting to get to the tail end of what's available within that current year operating budget. If we continue to have winter storms, after this, we will go to the reserve. So the town established the winter maintenance reserve, and so that's where we will go to make whole the remaining expenditures. So hopefully what we have now going forward is, typically in March, we don't necessarily see real heavy, hard, high accumulation numbers, and typically they melt in a relatively shorter period of time. We're kind of past the deep freeze point, or hopefully we're past the deep freeze point. I feel like I should knock on wood at this point in time, because I feel like I've just jinxed us. But,
Tomorrow's supposed to
There was
snow.
still a heavy snowfall, we had so much snow, but what we got on that Friday
yes.
was so intense and dense, we probably spent as much for that small amount that's finally gone now. And, the 2-foot snowfall went in 4 days, it was gone. But this thing here was, I
Was heavy.
Remnants are still
You
left.
got another 3 coming tonight.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
no, I mean, that's what I wanna bring up. We have the reserve, the money we put, the excess money we have put into reserve, so if something goes awry, let's go over this year, we have something, we're not affecting the overall budget. you
Yeah.
know.
And this year, while we haven't had, I would say this year, we haven't had a lot of snow events. We've had other years that we've had a lot more snow events, but the snow events that we've had, you're right, have typically been falling on the weekends or on the really late overnight hours. So it has triggered a lot of overtime. We've had several Sundays now. We actually had Christmas, we had a Christmas event, which is a higher dollar value as well. So this year, the events that we have had have been at higher rates. So we have exhausted that more so than we would in some of our other years that have had similar snowfall levels, but they've been during regular work days and stuff like that where we're not hitting overtime, because it's only overtime that gets charged there. It's not regular work days where they're plowing snow. It's just when they're in overtime status. So it has been a heavy year for that. And supplies, materials, we're still good on, because we came into the winter with a very good supply of salt. We had a full salt shed at the time. We're looking to try and start to replenish some of that supply. And so that number, the materials, you're going to see that start to be expended pretty rapidly at this point in time for the end of the year. So I expect that we'll probably pretty closely exhaust that budget in the current fiscal year. And again, any overtime, we'll have to go to the reserve. And if we need to go to the reserve for additional materials like salt and sand, that's what we'd have to do.
Do we have to go to New Haven to get salt, or can we go to, because the pier, New London Pier is done?
Yeah, we have the option of both. So we kept our feet in both waters. So that way, because the year that a lot of people lost the ability to go down to New London, a lot of them didn't have a secondary location for salt pickup, and so there was a pretty significant issue in a number of municipalities in getting salt. We've maintained both contracts, so that way we go in both directions. We have minimum quantities that we have to get at New Haven, and we have a minimum quantity that we got to get out of Rhode Island.
And it also said, because we have the salt storage shed, we're not down there in New Haven in the middle of the snowstorm.
No.
A lot of other towns have no
Right.
storage whatsoever, so they are in dire straits
Yeah.
in the lineup. So, talking to Matt, the highway suggests
We're able to
storm is
plan.
over, so now we can send the trucks down there.
Yeah.
off-peak.
And Matt has been very specific in calculating exactly how much salt is needed per road lane, per mile for varying types of events. So when we see the snow predictions, he has a pretty good handle on how much material we're going to have go out the door. And he's constantly monitoring that. So, we're always looking to see whether or not we need to replenish when we have nice weather, long before a storm comes. So that way we're not under the gun, and that way we're ready to react and ready to respond to any snow events, without any issue. But Matt has a really good calibration on the salt and sand usage in all of our trucks.
And I haven't heard any, everything, they're out there, most, no one's saying they're not out there, so I think it's a good, they're out there when they have to be, and nobody's talking to me about not having the roads plowed or salted or sanded. It's not a comment at all, where sometimes you get it once in a while. I haven't had any at all this year, so that's a good thing.
I mean, even last Wednesday when they had that like skim coat of ice, the guys were out. I mean, I was following one behind on Maple Street. I was like, woo, I don't have to worry.
Well, I don't, it's gonna have a time to react.
Yeah, well, at least I had some grip. But yeah, I was pretty impressed that they were going all over the place. And there's even my mom lives on High Street in Dayville, and her hill was completely all nice and salted, and didn't have to worry about that 90-degree turnaround. So
has, I think Matt used it the previous year, some of the chip sealing sweepings for some of the storms there, when had the ice mix there, that it's a little coarser than the sand, but it gives you a second use for that material.
Yeah, I don't know that he's necessarily had to utilize that really this year. I mean, that's a really specific application. It's when it's super cold and and your salt really doesn't have the ability to react. You don't get, the temperature doesn't come up high enough to actually get your salt to react, and you still need grip on the roads. So he has utilized that in the past, and I don't know that we've really utilized that this year, but yeah, it does give an option for that.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one question on law enforcement contractual services. We've only expended 6.92%. Is that due to the timing of payments for the resident state troopers?
Yeah, so the resident state trooper invoice only comes in the middle of June for the whole year. So they bill us after the year is over with for the entire year. So what we receive on a quarterly basis for resident state trooper billing, which is predominantly what you're seeing in contractual services. It's not the only thing in contractual services, but that's the predominant thing, is overtime. So as you can see, as we have more, and you'll see this in my manager's report, as we've had more law enforcement in Killingly's department, we've had less reliance on Troop D overtime to cover events and things like that, so we're seeing far less utilization in that contractual services.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I had a question about the capital funds, like if there's none expended.
Which capital fund?
So,
The
capital projects fund?
That's just a transfer. So anything that you see that's capital projects, capital outlay, those are all, that just hasn't been transferred over into the capital projects fund. It's a general journal entry that happens. Finance will be completing that, and you'll see it all go at once to the capital project fund. Yeah. They're all going in the capital project fund. It's just it's an accounting function transfer. Yeah. You'll probably see it next month, but.
Thank you. Mr. Whitehead?
How are we planning on the, our current fuel situation?
Yeah,
'Cause
so.
it doesn't look like it's gonna stop anytime soon.
Right, so with fuel, Killingly historically, we have locked into our fuel on an annual basis. And so Jen and I have been monitoring this situation for a while. We actually locked in. So, what day, Monday maybe? Last Friday, we locked in for all of our oil, diesel, and gasoline, and we locked in for all three products for the next year. So we're locked in. We have an increase in that. We're at what, 3? We locked in at 3?
Yeah, anywhere from 3 to 323, depending on which product.
Right. 3 to 323 or so is where we've locked in. So now we're locked at our set gallons. So we estimate our gallon usage for the entire year. It doesn't mean that we need to purchase that number of gallons for the entire year, but I will say we've been doing this process for a long time, so we have a pretty good handle on what our historical usage is. I've only had it once or twice that we haven't utilized the full gallons, and we had to do what's called a buyout of the contract. And one year was actually the year of the pandemic when the school buses weren't running, and we weren't consuming the diesel, and almost every town ran into that issue. Another year that we had, and it was a number of years back, when we had a really super mild winter, and we just none of us expended the heating oil, and that at that point in time, the largest consumer of the heating oil was the high school. And it was just a super warm winter. And we didn't, so we had to do a small buyout, but we were able to roll a lot of those gallons into the upcoming contract. So we've been watching that. So we're locked in. We're not going to continue to be subjected to because it's gone even higher since then. It's going to just keep.
What was last year?
Last year we were 270. No, we were 2.
Last year we were like just around 2.
Yeah, we were low. Jen, you're not on the mic, so you got to come up. You can't.
I move to suspend the rules so she can speak.
We last year we were right around $2. I started watching the prices in November,
Right.
December, and it was
270,
270, 285, and I was like, well, I'm $1 over. You know, typically, if what happened in the world hadn't happened, there'd be a little bit of a down cycle right
is.
now. And so I was kind of hoping that it would have come down a little bit lower than 270. So I was watching it all last week, and I got to the point where I said, we can't.
Yeah, both of us
We can't
agreed.
wait anymore.
We just
and I
need to
got on the
lock.
phone and I locked it in. And it was actually down a slight bit at the time that we locked in on Friday morning. And because it's that volatile, and by the time the contract was physically signed via just, okay, lock it in, you know, via phone and email, it had already gone up another 30 cents, which we were already all set, but.
Right, we were locked. So historically, for fuel pricing, and so I've been looking at fuel pricing and doing lock-in for fuel prices even when I was back with the bus company. So there's really two windows of opportunity when you look at your futures market for locking in your fuel. It's right around the February to April timeframe, right after your really cold snap portion of your winter, but before your summer gas season kicks in. And then your next window of opportunity, that's usually your best window. Your secondary window of opportunity is usually in September, right after the high summer month consumptions, before you hit into the winter. So those are typically the two areas of time. And so we monitor it throughout the year, but that's typically, we usually look to lock it in February, March timeframe. And so we were really hoping to see that price would start to decline once you got past that winter, that initial winter bubble, and the world changed. So thankfully, we're locked at this point.
Mr. Grandelsky.
What about the natural gas pricing? Is that the same?
Yeah, natural gas pricing, not quite the same. So the Board of Education at one time, several years ago, had done a level of contract on that, but I don't believe, we don't have a lock-in for our natural gas at all, and I don't know that there is a market yet for locking in on the natural gas. I'm not aware of any.
So, but the high school and the central school are on natural gas versus oil.
They are.
That got,
So they're not connected yet. The high school and the central school are not connected yet. Eversource still has to do that connection. They are planned to still do that connection. And so we did not include the oil gallons for the high school into the bid because we expect that by, within the next, 6 months or so, they'll be connected. And that project will be finalized. But Eversource has not finalized that project as of yet. And because there is no history in consumption, they wouldn't be able to lock in under a contract even if that wasn't availability. I want to say we looked at natural gas potential lock-in a number of years back, and there wasn't an opportunity for that. So,
I don't know if there was. That's why
yeah.
I'm throwing that out.
Yeah. Yeah, we usually try and look at any option to be able to do that type of lock.
that project took off fast, and then when they came to cross onto the highway or
They
before the
ran into
highway,
problems.
Yeah, was that all from the state to get permitting and all that?
It is.
So it's on both sides of the road, and then that bridge crossing is a gap.
It's the bridge crossing.
Seemed like it was done, you see
It's
it.
tied in at the bottom of the hill,
Mhm.
going up to the
That's
school,
what-
back to
Mhm.
the Soap, no, it's not Soap Street, it's,
It's Oak Street's bridge.
right there.
So it is the bridge that's the challenge for them right now. And, that has been historically what's been communicated to the town as to why the natural gas wasn't able to be connected was because it would have had to go underneath the bridge and this DOT wouldn't allow under the bridge. And then it was with this project, they were going to allow it, and now they're kind of stuck. So it sounds like they're working their way through that, and they're going to be able to still get the connection done, but it's taken longer than they had anticipated.
And maybe that's a good thing, because early on in the winter, they were saying there was gonna be isolated blackouts because there was gonna be insufficient natural gas to run the power plant. That's why I was asking that, if we're getting the sufficient natural gas, but we're not even hooked in yet, so, or the bridge is not hooked in, so, okay.
Now, I do have one question in regards to that. If they're unable, for whatever reason, to make that connection, who covers the cost of what they've already done?
Eversource.
Okay.
It's Eversource Capital Project, not the town. It's their infrastructure.
Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the finance budget report, the summary report on general fund appropriations for town government, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Next item is 12B, discussion and acceptance of monthly budget report, summary object based on adjusted budget for the Board of Education. Can I get a motion to adopt this?
Second.
Motion has been made by Ms. Wakefield, seconded by Mr. Grandalski. Is there any discussion?
Well, yeah, and that's right. Do we have to, is there no one to discuss? Just knock it down if I'm not supposed to ask
What
this
we can
question.
do, if you have any questions, our Board of Ed liaison from the council to the Board of Ed can always present the questions to the Board of Ed when they attend the next meeting.
So my question was about the deficit because of the paras, like I saw this in the meeting. So 150 to 175 a day for a temp. And when they calculate the deficit, are they including the benefits package with a regular employee, or are they just doing their, do you know what I mean? So in other words, it's $16 a day times 8 hours. That's not the comparison, it's the full benefits package, right?
So you
Your
wanna know if the benefits are
accumulated
included,
vacation
just the daily
time,
rate.
yeah, if there's any workers' comp, like, I don't know what their package
If
is
it's,
like.
if it's a substitute,
Yeah, they
No. So their comparison to do the deficit of temporary paras versus if they had a para there. I'm asking, what is a para there? What would be their daily pay, including the package?
I mean, per diems usually don't get any benefit.
Right,
I was gonna
that's
say
the
the per
point.
diem
So
one.
normally temps is cheaper,
Yeah.
but this, they're saying it's not, so it just makes me wonder, what's the package on a real employee para?
So you wanna know what the paras make versus what they're paying the subs per day? Per diem?
Including the
Including the
package.
benefits.
Yeah.
Okay.
and what the BOE would have to put in as far as like, on their
Taxes.
part.
Yeah. Okay, I'll ask.
I mean, my concern was looking at substitute teachers accelerated 82%. And then a couple paragraphs down from that, the teachers' salaries have a surplus of 725,000, where they have a bunch of positions they haven't filled or they've been filled with uncertified staff. I mean, that, it's a little, and then on the next page, it talks about under substitutes, it all accelerated in December and January. Is that just because, they called out sick, or? I mean, it's just,
Can
a little disconcerting that, we've opened the schools and the children need their teachers.
I will relay that question.
Well-
As a comment, when you read in that section there, it says, they had significantly lower substitute pay rates at $95 a day for certified and $110 a day for non-certified. So a non-certified is getting paid more than a certified?
Probably because they have such a high demand for the paras. And they have so many problems right now, with kids acting out and there are a lot of teachers calling out. A lot.
Well, here's another question or comment. Angeli said that most of the paras are paid by grant funding. So,
It's because they're written into an IEP.
so how does that fall into the budget when it's grant funded?
Yeah, so if it's grant funded, it doesn't go into the general fund budget,
Right,
because it's
Covered.
paid for out of a grant.
until the grant runs out.
Until the grant runs out and they determine whether or not they need to maintain the position
Right.
or the program, and if so, then they have to look for the budget. they have to look to incorporate it in the budget, but they wouldn't be presented within the budget if they're paid for out of a grant.
So the overall question is, why are we having so many absences? How many, why we're
Yeah.
paying, and why we're paying more to non-certified than certified? Okay.
As a former supervisor, I mean, it's
So
all about,
could they
it's,
be call-outs, or are they
don't
maybe
know.
they were on COVID quarantine, or they might have had to?
I mean, ultimately, when
This has been
when
a
I've
unique 2
left one,
years.
I was worked at one facility twice. They hired me back because they needed me. And both times when I changed jobs, I had a whole bunch of staff come with me because they didn't want to stay with what was
Where they
there.
were,
I mean, if we're short teachers and we're short paras, maybe it is the atmosphere in these schools and the management and administration, because if your employees will work for less than everybody else makes if they know
If
they're
they're happy.
appreciated and they're happy.
If they're happy.
So,
I'll ask if it's a leadership issue.
Mr. Grandelski.
Where, now the audit is completed, and the non-lapsing account, so they've already, the non-lapsing account is filled, pretty much it's filled right now, so they can't, we're not gonna take any money that's excess money identified by this audit. There's no
Correct.
place for it to go in the non-lapsing account, it's gonna stay in our general fund.
Correct. Correct, because as of the end, at June 30th of 2021, the non-lapsing account was maxed out at the $2 million, so there was no additional money that could be contributed to it.
Even if,
I don't know the right question to ask.
let me just add real,
When do they apply to use the extra funds from the general fund to go into the non-lapsing account?
So at the end of, yeah, so at the end of June 30th, they would have to have expended or approved projects to be expended out of the non-lapsing fund in order to be able to reflect a lower balance than $2 million. Then they could have requested unexpended funds as of June 30th, 2021 to be then transferred into the non-lapsing account. So what they will do is this year at June 30th, if they have an amount, if the non-lapsing account is less than $2 million and they have unexpended funds in their regular operating budget, they can then come to the town council and request money to be transferred into the non-lapsing account up to the maximum cap of the $2 million. That transfer request actually comes to you in November, December timeframe because it comes to you with audited numbers. So the audit takes place, we verify that the unexpended funds are truly unexpended funds and available for transfer. There's no adjustments that have to be made or anything like that. And we also verify the audited balance of the non-lapsing account to verify the June 30th of, value of that fund to determine how much is available to be transferred in.
So we're looking at what happened last year.
Correct.
What goes on now, whatever, if they spend money out of the non-lapsing account between now and June 30th, if you're just looking at the special letter that it wasn't too bad, but.
Yep.
So then at June 30th, that's when they ask for the amount of whatever it is.
So once the June 30th, they won't ask at June 30th, right? Their ask will likely come to you and they'll know what their audit or what their expected year-end balances are for those in September timeframe. It will come to you as an audited or pre-audited number likely in December for consideration.
Because there was a little confusion looking at the audit thing and we took money out of the general fund and we took money.
It's a lot of years.
for our stuff, then we took it for the non-lapsing account, and then the school put non-lapsing monies in the year before.
Yep.
And,
It's because it crosses fiscal years.
but I think the non-lapsing account is a lifesaver. I don't think they're using it to the full extent. I don't know, maybe.
Lydia
The-
says
you could
that
ask
every
a
meeting.
question on that.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
I don't know
Why
what
aren't
to
they
add, what to
utilizing?
throw out there, but if we have things that they could use we want to offset the minimum budget requirement, so if we can use the non-lapsing account, that doesn't
Lydia asks, because they always have small projects, like in, maintenance things and stuff. Lydia always asks, why aren't we using that account? So I'll reiterate that again.
Maybe we highlight it to say, because I think there's there's 2 million, they haven't used it. They used it a little
Right.
bit for the elevator at
Yep.
Westview Avenue.
Yeah.
That's the wax, and I haven't used it, so. I don't wanna spend money foolishly, but I mean, there's something
There are
there
things,
that
yeah,
maybe
they could use.
in a different way, we can help them get what they need. And not affect the budget. That's the key, not affect the budget.
So why aren't, or how can we help you
I think
utilize,
that's all,
or
sure.
the non-lapsing account more effectively? Is that good wording?
Whatever,
Okay.
or look at ways to use the non-lapsing account, just.
One thing to consider too is
Why
when they're looking at, coming from financial side of it, if you're looking at, you have a $3.4 million surplus that you're sitting on that year, you have all that extra money. Is there a reason to even go into the non-lapsing account when you know you can work out of your surplus? If you've got the $2 million in the bank and you've got $3 million in your hand, is it better to just spend out of this hand instead of depleting there and then have to replenish it later? It's
Well, yeah, it is, but it looks, if you wanna spend your budget money, if you're gonna put $3 million back into the general fund, I think you wanna spend that budget money. But again, the timing is a problem. And that's where the non-lapsing can come in, that unless you have something ready to go, and if the budget money allows it, or extra money in the budget that you're not gonna spend is available, use that first. But I don't know how to, we have this fund, and, I mean, we all keep looking at the minimum budget, everything comes into play, we wanna maximize the use of the funds. And get the most bang for our buck, I think maybe, however that can be done. It's out there.
I will say, in my opinion, when you have a Board of Ed that's returning that kind of a surplus, that they've been extremely fiscally responsible. Now, if we were hearing issues where they're not doing any maintenance and they're having all these issues, or things aren't getting done that should be getting done, which we haven't been hearing, then, all right, maybe you gotta spend some more of this money instead of turning it back as a surplus. But if they're paying the bills they need to do, they're doing what they need to do, and still being able to turn back a surplus, I honestly think they're being very fiscally responsible in that, because I know of instance in another town, I know quite a few employees in another town, and was told of a scenario where they had a Board of Ed that started stockpiling paper in a storage container because they had a surplus, and the paper ended up getting damaged because it wasn't climate controlled. It's just a storage container, and that's all taxpayer money that got wasted. So it's the fact that they're turning back a surplus shows that they're being very fiscally responsible and not running up at the end of the year, hey, we got all this extra money, let's spend it. So I do give them a lot of credit for working with the money they have and being able to do the job they need to without spending every single penny they have. And I believe that they're understanding that ultimately it's all taxpayer money. And if this is something where, okay, it gets turned back to the general fund, and then the council can use that for other things, like if we want to take some of that money and put it towards the community center, then that's less money we have to bond later on. So as far as, I see no issue with them having a surplus. I see no issue with them turning it back. And as far as going that year without touching the non-lapsing, when you have that, you're looking at that much of a surplus. I honestly think they did a great job at looking at, we don't need to touch that because we have this excess money here. Let's use what we have in our hand instead of dipping into the savings, because who knows what happens down the road if all of a sudden we don't have a surplus to top that back off if we've dug into it this year.
Oh, no, yeah, if you don't have a surplus to put back, I mean, that's, yeah, it's both sides of that. I mean, if you keep pulling out of the non-lapsing account and not put anything in, yes, there's a problem there too, so, yeah, but just, it's a balancing act. That's,
Agreed.
and I think we're in a good financial position. It's a good financial position to be in, that we don't owe money.
Yeah, agreed. Any further comments? Ms. Wakefield?
Wasn't the non-lapsing was originally the state's intention was for them to it be set up for like emergency purposes, like your furnace goes or the roof leaks or?
Yes, and also contemplated for unexpected special education costs as well. Because there's a lot of fluidity with special education placements that change districts. So yes, that's essentially what they were planned for. It wasn't meant to be supplanting a budget necessarily. It is silent to that.
Any further comments?
I'll just make one.
Ms. George?
I know I'm always the bad guy here when it comes to the BOE budget, but I'm gonna say it. At what point, when you're returning that much money every year, do you come to a point and you ask for less of an increase to offset that, like today, the last, when Mr. Angeli did his presentation, and the wish list was 7% for this year, and I understand it's gonna come down when he did the initial presentation, when he presented to us. But maybe they could be a little more conservative in what they're asking if they do, say, maybe a 5-year, look at the past 5 years and not just use COVID as the last 2, because they've been returning money every year consistently. And when you look at that, if it's a mill rate increase, it's costing taxpayers off the bat. And yeah, you're returning the money, but it's still hitting the tax base. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Murphy?
And I wish Norm was here, because I hate to put this all in Patty, and if it turns out it's not the right time to. So I would like to know how long some of the positions were vacant, because at some point, all right, it's been vacant a year, it's been vacant 2 years. At some point, do you say, okay, we're working without that position, we don't necessarily need that position, we're gonna take that money, we're gonna hire that counselor, that money. So I would just be curious, like how long?
I will say, in the defense of, the school district as a whole, there's a national teacher shortage. And it's not just certified teachers, it's paraprofessionals, it's speech therapists. There is a huge shortage right now, and they're literally fighting over teachers. And I mean, that's not an overstatement. So they are really
it's
having a
definitely
challenge.
not a criticism.
So-
Like, are they, I
Right,
know,
right.
like at my facility, we're mandated so many people. Are they mandated, certain amount of positions? Does anybody?
I don't know that they're necessarily mandated, but I will say that if there is something identified in an IEP related to special education, they are mandated to supply that. So there are some mandates around those requirements, but I don't have the fine details of what that is.
I mean, you looking at teacher-student ratios? I remember when my kids were in school, I mean, those numbers were super high. We had tons of kids. Some of those classes had 25-plus kids in a room with a teacher and maybe an aide if they were lucky.
No, I just hear meeting after meeting after meeting that these positions have been open for so long. So now I'm curious to know, how long have they been open? And if you can function without them, if it's been 2 years, 3 years, if it's been a couple months, I mean, I feel sympathy if people are just overwhelmed and they still need the things. But then it does make you wonder, if it's been 5 years with this position open. I know at my job, I'd be like, okay.
That may explain a lot of the substitutes, and the additional money they're paying, that they're costing, additional money it's costing to have the substitutes compared to what they budgeted for, because they have these vacant positions. So it's not like you have a classroom that the students are teaching it. They got to bring substitutes in to teach the students. So yeah, it may be, okay, we've been 8 months, we've been a year and a half on this position and not been able to fill it with a permanent teacher, but that doesn't mean that classroom's empty. They still have to have the staffing to be able to educate the students.
And if you don't have the teachers, then they cut the courses.
Yeah, so I don't need that question. Maybe that makes sense. You can take that question off.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to ask. I was just trying to throw in what I believe is part of that.
Because some of the student to teacher ratios are like 11 students to 1 teacher. So
Yeah, I was
can the,
gonna say,
can
at
the
that point,
classrooms be consolidated, and where are the needs for the teachers? Like, at what grade level? Or is it at the high school, elementary? Because their student, to teacher ratios are quite low.
Yeah. They've done that, like, they've done that, like, across the board.
Yeah,
Nationally
and
for quite a long
flexibility
time.
between,
But,
you know,
yeah.
elementary to high school is,
Very
you know, you gotta, you know, you might all have to have a master's, but you might not have specialized.
Yeah.
There's a major difference between the kindergarten teacher and she goes and sits in a high school classroom. Those kids, they'd run her over.
No, I can ask. I don't know what their teacher-to-student ratio workloads are. No idea. Or how many, like, I don't know if they've done a work study in a really long time. Yeah, it would be. I can bring that up.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're pretty low. They used to be much higher.
Any further questions, comments? Okay. We still have to vote on this. All those in favor of adopting or accepting the system object based on adjusted budget for the Board of Education, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to item 13, Correspondence, Communications, and Reports. 13A, the Town Manager's Report. Ms. Gloria, if you could go over this, please.
Sure. So the first part is just the current statistics on COVID. You'll note that hospitalization cases statewide have decreased. We're seeing that decrease in daily cases. We're now under 1 case a day, so we've substantially decreased from the peak that we had over January. And that, you know, so we're seeing that expected decline. We continue to see vaccination rates continue to increase. I wanted to give we received the final determination from the U.S. Board on Geographic Names. They did approve the name designation of Hoskins Island. So they did approve that commemoration. And I will say that they had reached out to ask whether or not the property owner, which is Wish, supported that. I did reach out to them, and they were very quick to support the recommendation. So very thankful that they were willing to do that. So I gave you what the actual designation reads, so you can see that there. Personnel, I'm sure all of you have seen at this point, Tracy Mason will be leaving us at the end of this month. She's had 23 years of service with us in the Recreation Department. She kind of has grown through the ranks. She's been a fantastic person to work with, very energetic, so much enthusiasm, and a huge commitment to this community. So I greatly appreciate the opportunity that I've had working with Tracy and all of her dedication and hard work going forward. And I wish her and Jeremiah the best in their new adventure. They're going to be moving down south. So it's fantastic, and they were able, you know, Jeremiah has gotten a great opportunity. So very, very happy for them, very sad for us. So with this departure, I'm going to be getting ready to advertise for the new director position. So that advertisement will be coming out within the next week or so. As with every departure, I always reevaluate job description first before we put anything out on the street. So that's what I'm in the process of right now, is reevaluating job description, making sure we're hiring for what we need to hire for. And then that job description will be out on the streets for that. And hopefully, my hope is that we'll be able to bring somebody in relatively quickly. We have a pretty active spring-summer season that takes a lot of planning, lots of planning in advance. So want to see if we can get somebody on relatively quickly. Also, as we're getting ready to really start the process of the Westfield Avenue project, to bring somebody in on that ground floor level of vision with regards to the community center project as well. So very key components at this point in time. And another thank you to Tracy for her willingness to really work to line everything up for the town and leave us in a really good place. She's really trying to button everything up, so I appreciate her efforts on that. Eversource, I attached the communication we got from Eversource on their vegetation management plan for this upcoming season. So they gave us kind of the, it's not really a list, but rather a map of general road areas in which they're going to be doing tree trimming and vegetation management on the roadsides and along their main branch lines for this upcoming season. So you're going to start to see a bunch of tree trucks out there, pretty normal. But that is also going to be posted on our website as just, accessible information for people to have. If anybody's interested in seeing if their area is on that. They also provided a scorecard. So they're trying to identify, how well did they do over the last year as far as power outages, responses, and all of that, how many block roads we had, that type of work. So they gave a scorecard. Law enforcement statistics, I included in here the overtime that you requested, Andy, with regards to the Killingly Police Department's overtime dollars over the last 4 fiscal years. So we've, I apologize, I said in last month's meeting that I felt that we were somewhere around 10,000 a year. Clearly it was more than that. I don't know why I had 10,000 sitting in my head, but I'll identify I misspoke. They do. They look great, but I misspoke. So they do look really good. And, I will say our law enforcement officers, the more that we have on board, and you got to remember the value of the hour spent in overtime for our law enforcement is significantly less than the hours that we have to spend in overtime for resident state troopers. So our average overtime hour for a resident state trooper, I believe, is somewhere closer to the almost $200 mark. We have to pay their overtime rate, plus we also pay an 87% fringe benefit rate on top of that, because we pay fringe benefit on overtime. We pay fringe benefit including health insurance and pension and all those other things. And we have gone to the state to argue that health insurance, nobody pays additional costs on health insurance in overtime. We have argued that. Many towns have filed suit to the state over that, and they come back every time and say, no, we've looked at the calculation and it's correct. So we all pay health insurance on overtime for resident state troopers and state troopers. So we get far more hours of overtime on our side, because we clearly don't have to pay health insurance on overtime. So that's just to give you that additional information that you asked for. Affordable housing, we got the letter from the state, and I communicated that with regards to our affordable housing percentages. So Killingly's affordable housing percentage is just over 10%. I believe in prior year, I think it was a little higher than that. When we got the listing for affordable housing for this year, I went through the list, and there was an affordable housing complex that's in Brooklyn that they had listed in Killingly. So I identified that to them and told them that it was really Brooklyn and not Killingly, which is where the number adjusted from. But it's one of those complexes that's historically always misidentified, because for the longest time, their mailing address was Danielson, because the Danielson post office, my mother used to live in that complex. It's a Danielson post, the post office from Danielson delivered the mail. They've subsequently changed it to Brooklyn, but for years and years and years, it was always Danielson, so everybody always thought it was in Danielson. So that is why the slight change, but we are still over the 10%. So we are in good shape, and you can see the list of all the towns and all of their percentages. So I did incorporate that entire list. And I believe that's it for my report. I will say I appreciate everyone's patience as I took some time off to rebalance family life, and I appreciate your patience on that. I'm hopefully through the thick of rebalancing, and I'll be reaching out to you to kind of restart some of those subcommittee meetings that we were having on a more regular basis. I apologize for taking a bit of extra time on that.
Mr. Granelski.
With respect to the affordable housing, how does Maple Courts and Virtual Terrace, do they fit into that calculation?
Yes, they do.
Mr. Wood?
I gotta say, with the law enforcement, it just continues to show that having our own constabulary has been a significant cost savings. 3 officers to 1 trooper is really a huge savings and a great benefit to the community as well to have that. And 10,000 sounds like a great number regardless, to be honest.
But it wasn't right.
It's a nice round number,
I know, but it wasn't right. I don't know why I had that trapped in my head, so I apologize.
It's a beautiful number, that's all. That's it.
I'm willing to accept the error, though.
Yeah, and again, the cost savings and the fact that that just continues to show the silliness of some of what happens over in Hartford as well, of 87% for health insurance that's already been paid for.
I agree with Mr. Wood. I mean, just looking at the numbers, we've gone from paying roughly $175,000 in overtime 4 years ago to the last fiscal year we're down to $75,000. So that's $100,000 in savings. And if you look, not just that, but as Ms. Colorio said, that's also more man hours because of the fact that our officers don't cost us, and with all the extra benefits that the state charges us for the resident state troopers. So to get more foot patrol, if you want to call it, more feet on the ground, and more hours in, and still save $100,000 over 4 years, I agree that it definitely was a wise decision. Any further comments? Ms. Colory, do you have anything else? Okay.
I do not.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on in the agenda. Next item up on the agenda is unfinished business for town council action, and we have none, so we'll move on to 15A, new business, consideration and action on a resolution to approve a collective bargaining agreement between the town and the Killenly Public Works Employee Bargaining Unit. Can I get a motion to adopt this?
I'll make
I believe the motion was made by Ms. Wakefield and seconded by Mr. Grandelski. Ms. Colory, could you go over this, please?
Sure. So this is the union contract with our Public Works Department. There's roughly 25, 26 employees within this bargaining unit. The largest economics that I will say that we negotiated with within this contract is the wages. So they just came off of a contract that had 2.25% wage increases over the 3 years. What we are seeing in mediation and arbitration awards coming out of those methods, we're seeing an average wage increase of 2.3 to 2.6%. That's the average wage increase that we're seeing coming out of those avenues. I feel that we came to the table, both sides, very willing to negotiate and being very fair and upfront with each other. The group was very diligent in what the asks were and respective of the asks on both sides. So the proposal, the tentative agreement that you have before you, which was ratified by the union ratified this tentative agreement on March 1st. So the council is before you for ratification. It has the first 2 years of wage increases at 2.5%, and then the third year drops back down to 2.25%. So it does show a decline on that. We're trying to recognize that higher cost of inflation over really the last 2 years. They're kind of getting a delay on that initial outlay. We did do several other modifications. We did increase meal tickets. So they do get meal tickets. The meal ticket that they get, it's taxable. So they pay taxes on it. It's not a reimbursement, so they're paying taxes on it. And they only get it, they earn it when they are called in for emergency call-ins for very specific timeframes, right? So it's not just, every average day. It's when they're called out for snow events and stuff like that. So currently they're at $10. This contract moves them up to $15. You can't get food for $10 anymore. in any of the drive-through locations or any of the places that are open typically during a major storm event. So I think it's, and especially since it's taxable, I think it's a fair economic to recognize that that price adjustment. And again, it's not that doesn't have a huge cost factor onto the budget because it's not on a daily basis. This is only during emergency call-outs. So that's an important factor. One of the other things that we modified in here, which doesn't really have a monetary value, but it's a benefit value. Currently we have a policy where they can earn an additional personal leave day if they respond to 90% of the call-outs throughout the previous snow season, right? It's that incentive program to have them come in. So we've seen kind of a little, that policy has been in place, I believe, since about the 80s, right? It's been a long time, and they've only been able to earn the additional one. So we've seen some waning on that as being a real incentive for them. So we negotiated to give them the opportunity to earn two additional personal leave days, but they earn it by coming in on those 90% of the call outs. So they gotta achieve a pretty high level of call out response in order to earn that additional personal leave day. Again, this is something that doesn't necessarily cost the town anything, because when they take a day off, it's not like I'm calling in somebody on overtime to cover their shift. But it's that added benefit in order for them to be able to take time off and recharge when it's less busy. And I will say they're usually really good about scheduling that time off, so that way it's scheduled around projects. So when we have major construction projects during the summer season, they're typically very respectful of that and make sure that we're not depleting crews. So I thought that was a fair compromise. Some of the sections that the town was looking to modify really was to be able to modify it to more current language with regards to FMLA and military leave and things like that. Also identifying that, specifically identifying that employees had to be in an active work status in order to receive certain of the benefits, like their clothing allowance and their boot allowance, right? So identifying that specifically, that they had to be in an active status for a certain period of time in the fiscal year. So that way, if you had somebody out for a long-term disability or long-term protracted reason for them being out, we're not paying them for uniforms that they're not ever using for a job because they haven't been able to be here. So that helped clarify some of that language and does provide some savings to the town should we run into that process. So I will say that this, I think that both sides really worked diligently, and both sides were very respectful in their asks and considerations on this one. So my request is approval of this.
Thank you. Mr. Grandelski.
In the area of meal tickets, but maybe not the meal ticket itself, but if there is this here about they work after 12 a.m., where do you go to get something? How do we, there's nothing open. Is there,
Yeah, there are some drive-through locations that are open. And typically, yeah, there are some drive-through locations that they do, and they may not be going for a lunch break at midnight. They may not be going until, 5 in the morning. And that's,
I'm just looking, I'm just trying to bring that out. I want to make sure that there's something there that in my being out and about, there's nothing after.
Right. And one of the things that they have done is they have collectively pooled their resource for meal tickets, and they have, like for the blizzard, for example, they were expecting that nothing was going to be open, right? So they collectively pooled their resources and sent somebody to the store the day before to buy a bunch of food that they could have at the highway garage that they could eat, and that's what they did.
That was what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Because in those circumstances, we need to do something. Here's a meal ticket.
So, and know that for the meal tickets, if you read through this, the meal tickets, they actually get this after the storm. So they're laying out the money in advance. They get paid this the first paycheck the month after. They earn it, right? So it's not like, here's a meal ticket, go buy food. It's, they get it after the fact. So they're earning it and accumulating it. So so for an event like the blizzard, chances are good nothing was going to be open. They wouldn't want to have anybody else be out there and have it open, right? Because that means somebody else had to drive in that, right? And they don't want to see that either, right? They know what it's like to be out in that the entire time. So so in that event, they collectively said, all right, everybody's got to throw X amount of money in the pot because we all have to go. They send somebody to the store with the list. Here, go get this. One of the guys brings a grill, to cook on, and they manage it that way because you're right. Sometimes there are events where it's just not a possibility, and so they manage it that way. But that's how they handle that.
The other issue too is, even if the drive-thru is open, you're not bringing a plow truck through the drive-thru, and most drive-thrus, for safety reasons, don't allow you to walk through. So it isn't.
Well,
most companies' policies
I agree.
don't allow.
7'6" is the bar.
It is.
The truck is 10 foot high.
Right. It is, but I will say this. So they have, when they have events, there's typically like the similar establishments that, they frequent because they know they're either going to be open or they know how to access them in that type of a situation where, it's only the drive-through that's open. You're not driving a plow truck through Dunkin' Donuts, drive-through, right? How do you do that? So, they've developed relationships so that way they can manage this, because sometimes it's also about being able to use a facility as well.
I'll just add to that. As someone who works in a environment that's 24/7, 365, all of our local establishments are fantastic about these things. I've been to Dunkin' Donuts at 2 a.m. in the morning when I needed a coffee or something else there. All of our local establishments are fantastic, and I'm assuming the same thing for our highway guys, and same thing for I can testify for holidays and big storms where we know those stores are closed there. I'm a breakfast guy, so I will gladly make breakfast at any point of the day. So
good to know.
That's definitely something that it's similar environment, similar understanding of how the world works here. So it's good to know that. And honestly, just overall in this contract, I think it's fair based off of everything you've already said.
And I do want to point out that in the positions section, we identified what appears to be identifying two new ones. One was already identified in a previous MOU, which is the vacuum truck operator. That truck requires, kind of specific training in order to be able to operate it properly and to make sure that you're maintaining the truck appropriately. So we designated that. So we have specific employee that is designated and trained on that equipment and on that, and they operate as essentially that crew leader for that vehicle. So we did that. The other one that's new this time around is the bucket truck operator. So the bucket truck, we have really turned into, we essentially have a tree crew out almost every day for 7 months out of the year. And we're stretching beyond that now at this point in time. We probably have a tree crew out at least 3 to 4 times almost year round every week. So I think it came to the point where we really needed to identify that as a specifically trained individual that's operating the bucket truck, that is, and we hire specifically people that are trained, that have experience in bucket truck operations. So we felt that at this point in time, that was a request by the union, was to designate that as its own position separately with the contract. And given the amount of work that we have done and the consistency of that work, we felt it was appropriate to identify that. And we've kept it in line with the other operators, because it really, you are operating a heavy equipment at that point in time when you're operating a bucket truck.
I just want to add, you did come before Personnel Subcommittee.
I
with
did,
this
yes.
as well.
I apologize.
The reason why it didn't come back before Personnel Subcommittee again after you reach the agreement with them was due to a timing issue as to when it's got to be approved by the council.
Yes, so typically I would have gone back to the Personnel Subcommittee for a recommendation to the Town Council, but since the union ratified on March 1st, I didn't have an opportunity. They ratified last Tuesday. I didn't have an opportunity to then schedule a Personnel Subcommittee meeting prior to this meeting. So I felt that I had gotten very clear guidance from the Personnel Subcommittee, and I felt that I stayed very well within those parameters by the Personnel Subcommittee. So I felt that it would be best to just bring forward straight to the council, and I did have that conversation with Jason on this.
And as chair of the Personnel Subcommittee, if this did fall within what was discussed, and I honestly believe that the Personnel Subcommittee would have recommended this for approval by the full council. One thing I did note when I was reading this, I don't know if we need to change this in the resolution. If you look at the wording of financial summary, it says projected new direct costs for this agreement in will not exceed $35,000 each year of the proposed contract. Do we need to?
No.
Okay.
That's just in my cover letter. That's not part of the resolution. The resolution is the next page, and there's no numbers tied to it because we'll be reflecting it within the budget.
Okay.
So I'm not asking
All
for any
right.
transfer. My
Okay.
apologies for my grammar.
It's okay. No apology needed. All right. That being said, is there any other discussion, further comments, questions regarding this? We did have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on in the agenda. The next item up is 15B, which is consideration and action on a resolution to accept the town's basic financial statements and related audit report for the fiscal year June 30th, 2021. Can I get a motion to adopt this resolution?
I'll make that motion.
Patty Georgia, second.
Motion has been made by Mr. Catula. I believe that was seconded by Ms. Barclay. I think she was a little bit quicker. So we have a motion by Mr. Catula, seconded by Ms. Barclay. Ms. Clorio, if you could go over this, please.
So this is basically the presentation you received earlier. And again, this isn't, you're not necessarily approving the audit report, you're accepting it. It's your formal acceptance of the audit report that's presented to you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from council? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is 15C. Consideration and action on a resolution to authorize execution of a 20-year lease agreement with VCP Realty LLC for the use of a portion of the Cap landfill for a solar installation. Can I get a motion to adopt this?
I'll make that motion.
Motion has been made by Mr. Catula, seconded by Ms. Wakefield. Ms. Colorio, if you could go over this. I will say right off the get-go, I think this is a great idea. There aren't many things we could do with a Cap landfill. And if it's something, especially considering we had the Conservation Commission Awards tonight, if it's something that can help reduce our needs for fossil fuels for energy, I definitely support it.
So this is about the only thing you can do with a capped landfill, is put a solar array on it. You can't use it for recreation of any sort. So this is kind of really the only way to activate it for revenue. That being said, so peel back a couple of years, I evaluated this project. I had our third-party consultant, Adam Teft from Titan Energy, evaluate it. And at that point in time, there weren't enough substantial incentive packages to make the project feasible. The project requires connection to three-phase power. They have to run three-phase power for about a mile. It's about $1 million for just that portion of the connection. There just wasn't enough incentives out there to make it a buildable project at the time. Peel forward, we became aware of a new incentives that the state was issuing. Their first round opens up on March 14th for submissions for the new project, which is really targeting exactly this, solar arrays on capped landfills. So it's a higher incentive stack in order to be able to incentivize the installation and connection of these projects. Typically, the installation of a solar array on a capped landfill is a substantially higher dollar cost for installation because they can't use traditional installation processes because they can't puncture the cap, right? So it has to be a ballasted system. Capped landfills in and of themselves have other challenges on the sites because there's slopes, there's vent pipes, there's potential settling that happens, right? So there's a whole host of other concerns that are on it. They're regulated by Connecticut Deep. This project would require that we would file for a use modification of the property to include a solar array. They have done those use modifications for other communities as well. So we wouldn't be a new one in the gate for that. But with that being said, so back in October of 2021, we engaged with Titan Energy for them to run an RFP to solicit proposals from developers for the installation of a solar array at the capped landfill. We received two respondents on that. One was Con Edison, the other one was Verigy. In the analysis, Con Edison was proposing a net metering type system where we would offset other bills of the town's electricity throughout the course of a 20-year time period. Verigy was offered two different options, that net metering option or the straight land lease, clean straight land lease. The recommendation that I had at that point in time and received some direction on was to pursue the land lease. Going for the net metering component, number one, you have to have enough electricity load from all of your other facilities. And we've converted some of our larger facilities already onto solar, so that reduces our energy footprint and load. And, as the years pass, we continually try and do energy efficiency projects, which means as time goes on, you can end up leaving money on the table in a net metering array, as opposed to just doing a straight land lease. So with that being said, I pursued the land lease. This land lease is a revenue of just over $53,000 a year over the course of the lease. It's a 25-year lease with 2 5-year extensions, which gets us out to a 35-year. There are several things in here that we identified. Number one, we minimized any risk that the town might have. So this is a capped landfill. If Deep comes up to us 10 years from now and says, you know what, the cap material that you guys all used back in the 80s and 90s to cap those landfills, we need you to go back in and rip it all out and recap it with a different material. We're not on the hook for their lost revenue or for their removal and reinstallation of that solar array. What we would be on the hook for, a portion of the lost revenue. We're on the hook for twice the amount of the annual lease. So $106,000 is our capped exposure for something like that, which I think that's fair. It's a very it's a slight risk that the town would have that to happen. Our landfill has been capped for 20 years. I want to say close to 20 years. And we've never had any interaction. We've never had any significant settlings or any environmental or hazardous waste exposure from a failure in our cap. So, I think that as long as the cap isn't disturbed, if the lease requires that if they disturb the cap or if they puncture the cap or cause a release of anything on the landfill, Verigy is 100% responsible. They would have to manage that. There is a decommissioning bond that is in the lease as well. It's funded over a course of 5 years up to $170,000. So that was, and from our attorney, that was a sufficient bond amount in looking at the size of the array and the duration and because it does still maintain a scrap value. Even at the end if it's unusable. So we were able to successfully negotiate the decommissioning bond. with regards to taxation, so the program that this project is being incentivized under with the state the state has them all as exempt from property taxes. It's considered still a net metering, but we are assigning those credits to Verigy and instead getting the land lease amount. In going over this with our attorney has negotiated and reviewed several of these leases across the state. There's not a ton of leases to compare this to because there's not a ton that have done straight land lease on a landfill, so it's difficult to compare. But what I was seeing from other rates was about a land lease value of around $25,000 to $30,000. So at $53,000, I feel that we're getting some level of compensation for property taxes. While it's not deemed property taxes, we are still getting some value for that in the negotiated lease value. So I believe that what you have before you is a fair and equitable lease value for an annual lease on a parcel of land that we will have no other potential revenue source for. I think that we have mitigated very well the risk and liability to the town in all aspects, and we have provided for that decommissioning bond to be sure that the town isn't left footing a bill for something that if something gets abandoned. So the next steps for this, Verigy would use this, if this is agreeable to the town council and is approved by the council, I will submit it to Verigy. They will have to submit this with their submission into the program on the 14th. And then we would move on from, go on from there to see if the project ends up being awarded. And ultimately, they have a due diligence period where they have to do further investigation and engineering and evaluation of the site. We have to do our permitting with DEEP for the site, and so there's outs on all sides for that as well, so.
Just two questions. Do you know if there are any other towns that are participating in something like this where there would be other applicants for whatever limited grant money there may be for this project?
I have my understanding from our third-party vendor from Titan Energy that he is aware of several others across the state that are intending to participate.
Okay.
I don't know who, and I don't know how large.
Okay. But with a deadline approaching for the
All of them.
applications.
So all of them get submitted on the 14th. They don't get submitted beforehand.
Yeah.
They all go in. It's like an energy auction kind of thing. They all go in on the 14th. So you don't really know who's putting in exactly what until it all goes in.
Okay. The other question I had, I know this may be a off-the-wall question. If there were an excessive amount of methane released from a vent pipe way over what anybody would ever predict, and there was some kind of electrical short in one of the panels, and there was a scenario where the cap got damaged, the solar panels got damaged.
So they're not necessarily installing near our vent pipes.
Okay, all right.
So that's not an area that they would be able to necessarily install around.
Okay.
So that would be
Almost impossible for it to happen.
right.
Okay.
We would all call our insurance companies. That's what would happen.
Okay.
And we would all file insurance claims, and the insurance companies would battle that one out. But we would have a zero outlay because we have we have $1,000 outlay, I think, on that. But it's essentially, that's an insurance claim all the way around.
All right. Ms. Wakefield.
The one thing you mentioned about the state declaring it tax exempt, aren't most landfills owned by municipalities, so wouldn't that make them tax exempt anyways?
So not necessarily. So there's been a lot of debate within the state and actually within the tax appeals courts with regards to solar array and property taxation. The legislation that was passed with regards to the exemption of solar arrays from property taxation is a little vague, and it depends on which town and which assessor you're talking to will depend on whether or not they view them as taxable or not taxable. So in general, a solar array that is put in by a developer on an open space is considered a business development and business generation, and would be potentially subject to property taxes. The legislation, and I think it's the intent of the legislation that's out there right now that the state had, is to exempt behind-the-meter solar for residential and commercial buildings. So if you're behind the meter, and the property owner is consuming the energy directly before it goes out onto the grid, then those were intended to be exempted. They have not necessarily been exempted in every municipality across the state because the language is vague. And so the tax appeals court, because many of the developers have filed tax appeals across the state. I mean, all of the tax appeals were essentially handled as large single tax appeals for all of them that were submitted across the state. There were 2 attorneys that were negotiating all of the tax appeal cases on the solar claims because of this. And the tax appeal judge basically told the town's assessors and the solar companies to go back and talk to the legislatures and get them to fix their language in the legislation to make it clear. And 2 cycles that hasn't happened. So hopefully this time around they'll get it straightened out. But this incentive program that was put in place specifically identifies them as exempt programs. And yes, they're all town-owned properties, and like many town-owned properties were not subject to taxes. However, in different municipalities, they could be viewed as business development and not necessarily town, because the town doesn't own the solar array, right? And so it's subject to judgment and viewpoint on that. So it's just that wasn't necessarily clear in some of the other legislation.
Ms. George?
Now, according to the contract, they have to carry $2 million
Yes.
insurance. So they're responsible for anything that would go wrong.
Absolutely.
And that's per occurrence, not just like.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, per occurrence.
Now, is that like a specific insurance? It says general insurance, liability insurance.
That's our general requirements.
Oh, okay. Are there, I'm just, because this is kind of like a new thing.
Mhm.
Is there like a specific policy insurance companies are offering, or just falls under general?
Falls under general liability.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Just want to add one thing real quick. As far as the behind-the-meter taxation, for those of you who were newer, we did deal with this a few years ago, where we were dealing with tax appeals here in town based off of that. And so it isn't something unheard of. It is something we've dealt with before. So, any more comments, questions? Ms. Murphy?
So, Mary, just for clarification, I missed a little something. So if Deep comes in and says we need new covers or whatever, we don't pay for any of their lost revenue. But then there was something right after that. Do we split something with that?
So we are liable to reimburse them up to $106,000. That's our exposure for lost revenue.
A year?
Per occurrence.
Per occurrence.
Per occurrence. And so,
6,000.
and I will say that, we were very specific in trying to get that language in to cap that potential exposure because, of course, the original proposal was that, we were covering everything. We were going to cover all of their lost revenue and, dismantling and reinstallation costs and all that kind of stuff. And, we did require that they carry business loss insurance. So that way, if they're able to recoup that from a business loss insurance, they're able to do that, and then that lessens the burden from the town as well. But recognizing that because they don't have any control over and also the town doesn't necessarily have control over a state or federal agency that comes to the town and says, oh, by the way, we need to have this done, or you have X period of time to get this done. But again, we're trying to plan for all scenarios. It's really tough to do that. And we agree on the town side that, it's probably a pretty remote possibility of that coming to fruition in the course of the 35-year lease, but it does give that buffering, right? We wanted to make sure we contained any potential possibility.
I got one more thing. I just wanted to thank you, Mary, for all your hard work on both this and the union contract. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Mr. Wood?
So I know you mentioned the 106,000 per occurrence there. So there's no financial loss to the town, say something happens for some awful reason there, say in year 5, and they're expecting to be there 20 years, we're not reimbursing them for the last 15.
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Mr. Grandelsky?
They've got to do their due diligence and review the whole site before anything is done and deal with deep.
Correct.
So that might make it, if somehow they can come up and say, we don't want to go here, that may be something that they.
That could still happen, yes. They have a due diligence period where they have time to go through and determine whether or not they bring in their engineering, and eventually, something crazy is uncovered and they determine, wait a minute, this isn't going to work, or the incentive package that we got awarded isn't sufficient in order to be able to make this deal work, then yes, they do have the ability to not move forward with it.
I think overall this is a good idea. I mean, the property can't be used for anything else. I mean, the only, maybe a comment that I want to make is, I remember as a kid going to the World's Fair in New York, and the whole thing was, we can make playgrounds on capped landfills. That still's in my mind. And look at where we are now, totally, you can't do anything. So this is something to make that go away, that, and we're getting a little bit of a benefit, but I think the benefit overall, it's free energy, and it's taking a little bit off the grid.
It will also reduce the amount of vegetation management that the town needs to do. So right now, we have to do all the vegetation management for the entire capped landfill. We go out there and mow it every year. We have to manage all of that. Where the array is, we will no longer be managing that. That will be the developer's responsibility to manage all vegetation management in and around the solar array area. So that'll reduce our management requirement.
Ability to dump on somebody else. Ooh.
It's their responsibility.
Wow, okay, that's.
So it minimizes that.
That could be a tough cookie, if,
Well, they're just going to have to do it more often because they're going to want the solar array producing. They're not going to want hay over the top of it, so.
Okay. Because I know every now and we're looking at all the discharges, we're talking big, discharge from the sewer plant, now we're going to monitor the discharge over here, you get the ash plant, all these things, all this discharge is everywhere else, so at least we're getting something out of an unusable piece of property, we're getting something out of it, so.
Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on in the agenda. Next item up is council member reports and comments. Mr. Grandelsky, could you start, please?
Conservation, well, Donna's been here the last 2 meetings, so she's kind of upgraded. I could not give a report anywhere near what she's put forward, so that's good. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Whitehead.
So for the Solid Waste Committee, we sent our budget over to the council for approval. We did discuss a few things. We kicked the can around about the town-wide pickup. We talked about other towns, exploring other ideas. And in that budget, I just want to say that there is monies in there for solid waste pickup for this upcoming year.
The household hazardous waste?
Hazardous waste.
Household
yes.
hazardous waste.
Thank you. That's it.
Was there any discussion regarding possible impacts from the incinerator in Hartford closing?
We just talked in
Yeah, a
general
little
that
bit.
the trash is gonna be more of that, the 49 towns tied with that took to it. There we don't know what that might be.
Yeah.
A minor, it was a small aside that was in, and it's gonna be closed, they're not gonna rebuild it.
Yep.
And eventually, trash costs are going up.
And we're locked in for right now, so that'll affect our next roundabout with Costello for their contract.
But it's,
Okay.
yeah, it's out there.
Yeah.
Dave is
Yeah.
saying trash is going, it's
Right.
all, even the recyclables, we're paying almost the same
Yeah.
for recyclables as for.
That's for trash. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Murphy?
What are the initials?
PCA.
PCA. Honestly, don't remember much about it. They were within budget, they were within permit. Do you remember anything?
Well, Dave gave a good presentation.
That's what I was, like, I can't even remember if we saw that, if we've had a meeting since then. I thought we had one. You know what I mean? I'm a little bit confused about it, but yeah.
I believe they also did request the extension of a 1 year with the Suez contract, and
We didn't hear that.
right,
We
but,
didn't hear
and they, well, they did that in open session.
that. Really, I don't remember.
They would have done that in open session, and, so yeah,
Yeah, we don't remember that.
So they were-
We had to go out for executive session.
Oh, maybe
no,
after-
it was been after executive session.
Okay, that's why we didn't see,
Okay.
okay.
It would have been after executive session, it was done in open session. So, so yeah, they did request that, and I believe they closed the RFP process that they had done for operators as they continue to explore what their next steps are. But I believe that was the other thing they did at their meeting.
Very good.
Thank you. Anything else?
Agriculture, they mostly just talked about their website and the classes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Wood?
So I attended a zoning board of appeals meeting. It was about a property over on Dyer Street to allow them to have a parking lot there where there was no parking lot to begin with. That was approved. I've attended the personnel subcommittee, which we've already discussed that. And just a correction, I know you're used to being chairman. That's me on that one.
I apologize. That's right.
I took it. It was easy. And I believe I attended a fiscal subcommittee, but I can't remember. I got a great memory. It's just short. That's so I think that's about it. I don't remember what fiscal was about.
We didn't have.
We didn't have one.
Yeah,
So
We didn't have one.
I
So,
didn't
you
think
know-
we did.
You're doing all right, you're okay.
it's been a long few
We
weeks.
had the joint one with the BOE there, that open
We did have that.
discussion.
I knew
Yes,
we
you
had
did. You had the joint
Okay,
discussion
maybe I'm
with the
not
board,
losing my
with the
mind just
budget.
yet.
You're right. See, I've lost my mind.
So it was a joint meeting with the Board of Education to kind of give them an outline of what we're expecting for this coming, how we expect them to present the budget essentially to us for more transparency. We didn't tell them numbers. We didn't discuss any of that. It was more
No.
format than
Yep.
anything.
Mhm. Anything else?
But that's it.
Okay. Mr. Cottula?
Meeting with the Permanent Building Committee, which was a brief update on the projects for KMS and Westfield Avenue, and it was primarily to set upcoming meeting schedule to meet the timelines for the projects. Certain things have to be done by a certain time, so that was for the meeting schedule on that. And obviously, as Mr. Whitehead and Mr. Gronowski said about the solid waste budget, we met and discussed the budget and gave that approval to send to the town council, and the joint fiscal subcommittee meeting with the BOE.
Thank you. I was in the personnel subcommittee meeting that Mr. Wood is the chairman of. And also in the joint fiscal subcommittee meeting with the BOE. That's all I had. Ms. George?
I attended the BOE meeting, I must say.
That was,
So do we have more transparency?
recommendations were made due to the timing of the meeting and when they're presenting their budget. To do a complete overhaul would have been extremely difficult. I understand that when we first discussed it with Mr. Angeli was a year ago.
Yes.
However, the planning of the joint meeting, not because of town council not wanting it to happen, but being able to get it lined up with BOE was one of the big issues, and finally, by the time we got it lined up, we were able to schedule it. It didn't give them enough time to make any major drastic changes. We did have some recommendations on format changings, and also see how this looks, and that this isn't an end-all. This is a start and basically a stepping stone in the process. Yes, we should see a change. Yes, we'll see a change in this, and then, depending on how the council feels about how this format looks, any further changes, we can then schedule another meeting a lot sooner than 2 months before the budget's due.
Is Christine Clark, sorry to interrupt, is she,
Okay.
because she's the financial, wizard with the, is she included in those meetings? She wasn't there.
Yeah, she wasn't there for that one. Yeah, she had some prior engagement she couldn't make that meeting.
Lydia made the statement that she would like to see Christine, so that was part of the report here. So going forward, she'd like Christine Clark included.
Christine was included, it's just she was unable to make it.
attend. Yes,
Going forward, she was.
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Hopefully.
Lydia had wanted that reiterated. They'll be sending the budget to us by March 15th, correct?
Yep.
That's by charter.
Yep.
Okay. And then, there was a big discussion on the school-based health centers, but they did not vote on that, and that will be coming up again. I know there's some rally plan tomorrow night about that. It might get snowed out, who knows. But then there was a presentation, gentleman, Greg Scheimer from Rebel Marketing, and, he's a PR firm. The superintendent wants him to come in and, I guess, I don't know, reimagine the school district's image to, there were 3 things. Recruit teachers, change the image, and I can't remember the third one. But overall, there was quite a bit of pushback from the board members, and we'll see what happens with that. They also went over 3 math curriculums, and they chose one. All of that information's on the school website. Then, NECOG. There were 2 NECOG meetings. One was actually really informative. Let's see, Senator Flexer was on the call, Representatives Davitsky, Nuccio, oh goodness, Lanou, and who was the last one?
Was
What
Pat,
was it just-
was Pat Boyd on that one?
No.
No, you're right, he wasn't on that
I believe
one.
that was it, there were 4. But they talked about the legislation they're going over right now, some of the upcoming bills. I believe NECOG has that information up on their website. There was also, I can't remember his name, the Finance Commissioner. I left my notes on the table, so I do apologize. But we are going, the state of Connecticut is getting an additional around $10 million from the federal infrastructure bill. And that'll be like roads, bridges, and towns are being asked, and regional areas being asked to put in grants for that money. And they're looking at, regional projects are probably gonna take priority, and the sooner the better. But they haven't put out the parameters, specifically the state, for requesting those grants. So it's kind of a standby system. That's all I got.
Can I just question comments, and maybe Ms. Colorio can, some of this probably gonna be directed to you. With this proposed, mental health clinic in the high school, I'm assuming we have a memorandum of understanding in place between the Board of Ed using town-owned buildings?
When the Board of Ed has control of a building, they have full control of the building. So there's no MOU required because they have full control of the building.
Okay. Second question would be, with, my understanding is Generations Healthcare is a for-profit entity. Any property they have that would be at the school if this goes through, would that be taxable property?
I would talk to our assessors, but I don't know how much actual property they would have, you know, I mean, a lot of it would be incidental type. I'm not sure that there would be a lot of like furniture, fixtures, that type of stuff necessarily there, but I would talk to my assessor about that.
My understanding is they'd be up on the 3rd floor in the high school. So I don't know how much square footage they're using.
Yeah, I don't know how much the square
I don't think
footage.
it's going to be a large
Right.
footprint in the school.
No.
I think it's just going to be a certain section upstairs.
I had economic development and I had rec commission. So I know everybody really, I mean, I was super excited last month when I saw the presentation for the Brickyard. It's, you know, they're moving forward with that. I know they've applied for grants that are available. They're competitive, but, you know, the fact that we've got a lot of this work in place, you know, it bodes well for us. The new brewery was where Black Pond used to be is expected to open by the end of this month. Some of the EDC members were like, too bad it couldn't be open on the 17th of March, because that would be really good. I know I missed Saturday's opening at ribbon cutting at the NK Market. Apparently, he's looking to take over the extra space that's next to that and have like a noodle house. So, I believe they also talked about the people that are renovating 140. It looks like they possibly have a potential office person to go on the 2nd floor. They're working on fire regulations and stuff like that. And they are very excited about the proposed things that are going to be going on behind them. All that's good for them. And of course, Jill's, you know, she's just doing a great job. You know, I know she doesn't live here in Killingly, but, you know, she's got a real heart for this town. And, you know, honest with you, I've lived here my entire life, and it's nice to see somebody else come in from out of town that sees what I see. You know, we have a historic, beautiful town that has a lot of resources and a lot of opportunities. And just like in our schools, everybody always trashed us when I was in school, you know, oh, it's just Killingly. But if the education's there if you want it, the opportunities are there if you want it. And so it's really nice to see somebody that doesn't live here that's just as excited, almost as excited as Donna Brownwell and the rest of us. The rec commissioner was very sad to hear that Tracy's going to be leaving. I'm glad for him. She was actually talking. She's always we were talking about farm animals, and she goes, maybe I'll raise chickens because, well, you got a little backyard. She goes, yeah, but I have to space it. I'd be like in the middle of the yard. Now, you know, now she's gonna have, you know, place to put lots of chickens. So Michelle, you know, maybe you should give her some pointers before she leaves. You know, of course, things are going to be changing. I will say they've got a great support staff in there. Anthony and the office, Pam, Val, and Pam, Mo, Val, and Pam. They do a great job. The theater, they're super excited. They can't wait to get into the new community center. The potential of going from 200 seats to 800 seats for a show, and that's just really super excited. The new people that we put in there are very excited. They're very motivated. They got some great ideas already coming. And we did vote because they were meeting quarterly. We did vote because things were coming out of COVID and things like that, that instead of quarterly, we'll be going every other month, and we're going to be doing the odd months. The other thing, too, is even though our numbers are lower in, like, youth hoop this past year, we were pretty much full. So, considering the fact that there's a coach shortage, we're still providing services. I know the senior movies that they have every Wednesday go over really well. They're very well attended, and so it's nice to have a rec department that that spans the ages, everything from squeaky sneakers to silver sneakers. So, but that's it.
Thank you. Ms. Barclay.
From the Killingly Housing Authority meeting of February, they're going to do a capital needs assessment at Beechwood Terrace. There's structural cracking of the floors and the walls from the additions that were done years ago, and they need that before they can file for a grant. And they installed a new horn at Beechwood Terrace to alert the residents if somebody's in trouble. They hear the horn and they know that somebody needs assistance. They did hire a new food service chef. It was the food service provider's policy for mandatory vaccination. One of the residents had suggested that repairing the cabinets and tubs and not working on the floors. However, there are policies to follow when you're working with grants, so that's not feasible. And they're looking for a repair of the buildings in stages to take 3 to 5 years. Currently, there's 7 vacancies at the apartments due to death, transfers to nursing homes, and elderly going to live with their children. They like to fill those 43 apartments first because their reimbursement or cost is $1,300, which is a higher reimbursement from the state. And they did hire a new maintenance person, but they are looking to see how it'll work if they'll find an outside contractor to paint the apartments to get them ready. It would be $1,000 to paint the whole apartment because the maintenance is they're overburdened, and if they're painting, they have to respond to other calls. So that was it for the Housing Authority. From the Planning and Zoning meeting on the 22nd, the public hearing was only open to what the cut and fill analysis and the conditions of the interviewer, which would be the attorney for Alexander Lake Association, and the applicant. So 31,000 cubic yards of material will be leaving the site, and it's going to take 75 to 115 trucks a day, and it would be an 8-week process to remove all of the fill. And Alexander Lake is concerned about the noise from the new construction. Currently, the noise meets the DEP standards, but Frito-Lay will make efforts to mitigate any noise during the building process. So the public hearing was closed, and one of the stipulations prior to building was that they needed to create a buffer on the southwestern border of the property, and whatever it takes to create the buffer, and they must maintain it after it's established. So the Frito-Lay project was approved. The American Storage Centers LLC, they want to build storage where the old Byrite is. So there were some concerns as to snow removal because of the widths of the roads they were proposing, and fire and ambulance access. So that project was denied without prejudice. Once they come up with ways to address the concerns, they can reapply. And that is it, except for at the next meeting, they will be addressing the zone change on Route 6. And let's see. There's an application for a special permit for Jolly Commons. That'll be discussed on April 18th. and a special permit for Mechanic Street, discussed on March 21st, and then a zone map change for Lake Road and the industrial zone, which will be discussed on March 21st also.
Ms. Clory, I just have a question. In a situation where P&Z approves a permit with a buffer, and the buffer needs to get maintained, who in the town is responsible for making sure that buffer gets maintained and that the requirements for the buffer are met? I know previous permit at Frito-Lay, they were supposed to have a buffer. It was supposed to be maintained by, I believe it was a licensed arborist or whatever it was. There was a forest management plan, and that had never been adhered to.
The forest management plan never got even filed to the town. So we had no parameters to verify anything with when we don't have anything filed to the town. So I know our staff, our zoning enforcement officer, and our planning development staff are looking to have those, make sure that they're required to be filed and filed on the record, so that way we can have something to evaluate. But if it's just a buffer, if it just says a buffer, that could mean almost anything, right? So how do you, unless it's specifically outlined as to what that buffer is supposed to be, it then comes down to sound, whether or not it's mitigating the sound. So it can be challenging in that respect, but our zoning enforcement officer and our planning and development staff are the ones that try and do the enforcement on that.
Thank you. Ms. Barkley?
So I believe in regards to the buffer, they are going to be very specific about having trees and shrubs and evergreens, and they will be checking the area to make sure that it's maintained. And it did specify that they had to submit a plan, and if they didn't submit, if it wasn't to the P&Z's acceptance, that they wouldn't be allowed to build. That was.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm glad to hear that, because that is one thing that was brought up to me by a couple residents around the lake, was the fact that they had that before and it was never adhered to, and what would be done this time to make sure anything like that would be adhered to.
That was brought up, that they had this plan and they didn't adhere to it.
Thank you. Mr. Grandelski?
With respect to the housing authority, how is their budget? Because they have so many openings, this is when it was pretty full, they had a hard time, and now they have quite a few spaces opening. With their comments on funding or?
So they try to fill the ones in the
high rise?
First, because that's $1,300 a month, but they do have a waiting list, so that's why they're hiring a painter to get the apartments ready. So that's one of the things, is the ability to get the apartments ready to get it rented, because they were short-staffed. And so I believe they have 3 maintenance personnel. So when they're in the middle of painting and cleaning a building, they'll get called away to do something else. They have snow removal. They have to do the snow removal, and they can't work on painting the building. So
I know their budget is tough over there. Usually go through it. Mary, what do we have? I mean, is there any, because it's their own entity, but Mary Brown's program, she's been in there getting grants and things to, as much as possible, whatever. I don't know. You're talking about the cracked floors, are we involved in, or?
Yeah, that's our support that we provide to the housing authority, is supporting grant application processes. So clearly they need to do that evaluation first, so that way they can identify what they need to ask for. And that's going to be a burden to the housing authority to complete that. And then we can take that information and submit for grant applications. So the critical piece is to identify and determine extent and cost estimations. So then we can platform over and start applying for grants. The last time around that we applied for grants, this last year, we weren't awarded any because the state awarded them all to the other side of the state. So hopefully, in future years, Mary Brom has been incredibly successful in getting grant opportunities for the Housing Authority. We've done a lot of renovations at those facilities based on those grants. So our hope is that in the upcoming grant cycles, we'll be more successful and the state will be a bit more equitable in their distribution of those funds.
I forgot I did the Historical Society.
Okay.
I did the Historical Society, and they were excited about the brochures they were doing, and they had a couple questions about the budget, so that's all.
Okay, thank you. Anything further from anyone? Ms. George?
Michelle, Ula, and I attended the Asian market
The
ribbon
grand o-
cutting,
the ra-
and it was fantastic. And their expansion is gonna help them so much, because like, their daughter was explaining, especially with like, she didn't say the supply chain issues, but they had to use a separate facility to store like some of their products, like their rice and things like that, and now they have enough room for everything. So it's been really good. It's gonna be great over there for them.
Thank you.
I made fishball soup.
You did?
I did, yeah, after shopping at the Asian market.
All right. Seeing nothing further, we'll move on in the agenda. Item 17, executive session, and we have nothing for executive session, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second it.
Motion was made by, I believe it was Mr. Grandelski, seconded by Mr. Catula. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? This meeting is adjourned.